And we're live. Ramos Comics here. It is my birthday, and I'm a sharing a birthday live. And let's add.
Hello there.
Hello, my friend. I have.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, thank you. I have not done a live in some time, and found out there are so many things I do not know about it, and I'm so used to doing it at night. I had no idea how much light comes in, so I'm going to have to close that down. And so, uh, I'm not even sure. Am I supposed to hear myself on my earphones? I don't recall. Yeah,
What was
so
that?
I don't know if I'm supposed to hear myself on my earphones or not. I guess
Oh,
I've just never noticed how
I don't think
quiet
so.
it is. I never notice how quiet it is when I'm talking to you guys.
I don't hear me through my speaker.
Okay. So I'm trying to get used to this. And I thought I could simulcast, and I didn't realize that's a paid part of
Ah,
StreamYard.
yep.
So I'm almost seeing that maybe I can just have like a couple of my other devices on as well. So I don't know. I don't know how well that would work and what kind of chaos would ensue. So I'm going to attempt to go live on TikTok as well. Last night I was on till about 4 hours, I would
Wow.
say. Yeah, talking
Wow.
about talking about nothing but comic books and Godzilla, which you
Wow.
know that's what I do. It just ramble on because again it ebbs and flows. People come
Right.
in and people leave, and it's almost the same questions kind of rotate in and out. And so again, it's one of those things where it's where it can get a little bit uh not crazy because it's just you know a fun time. I do realize that even though I do it late at night, 9:30 or so, I do still get a large amount of kids coming on. I mean, I'm 53. Anyone under 20 is kids.
Right.
But there's just like I do it at night thinking that, maybe I'll get a different crowd, but TikTok's global. So
Hmm.
so there's many people all over the place joining. And so I mean, I run a clean stream anyway.
Right.
I try not to curse, but again, it's that you have some kids will come in, they'll make a comment and then disappear and leave just to see if they get your ire up or whatever.
Ah.
And it's funny because there's a group that didn't believe that I worked for Marvel
Yeah.
because what proof is there other than just me saying it, you know? And then it's like, okay, I even had someone's like, because I was talking about publishing my own comics, and you'll always get someone that wants to get your ire up, and it's like, I've worked in comics for 30 years. I've talked to everybody. They were more vicious things said in the bullpen, as you know, than anywhere else. So it's like this person, the only trip up that I feel that I have is when I'm reading something and it's so outrageous that it's like I don't want to laugh because it is kind of funny, but at the same time it's like again, they're kids, so they speak in internet lingo, so they do initials from stuff, and sometimes like I have no idea what they're saying. I don't know if they insulted me. I do not know if they had they're complimenting me,
Is that a
but
compliment or an insult? I don't know.
I don't know. But I also have found that I do have people that do show up every Friday.
That's good.
And what's cool about it is they'll tell me, oh, that means this
Ah.
means that. And some of them will defend me. And I usually go, don't worry about that person. They're probably no longer here. You know? So let me try to go live on TikTok and let's see if I can get that to work.
Let's see what he can do.
Yeah, because I also found out that on TikTok they do not have a way to go live on a Mac. So
Wow.
I can upload my videos
Hmm.
onto it. I can from my Mac, I could upload videos and stuff like that, and it's fine. It works perfectly well. But again, the other thing is that it just doesn't let me simulcast it. I think I could put it on Twitch and then have Twitch
I
put onto
never used
TikTok.
Twitch.
But I don't use Twitch myself. It's one of
Yeah.
those where it's like, yes, I've recorded on Twitch. I recorded some gaming because I was playing a lot of Halo with my friends. So we would record it and try to edit some stuff that we think is funny. It turns out it's not funny. So we just have, we have video entertainment that we don't use anywhere else.
Yeah.
Let me bring down the shade. Maybe get some of that glare off. So did you do your bike ride today?
Did my bike ride out in the 27 degrees, but I was dressed all toasty warm. So.
Oh, okay. I only went outside to get my what should have been my free cup of birthday coffee. So Dunkin', on the original app, they used to have the ability to get a free coffee on your birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And like many app programs will have something like that where you get a free coffee, you get free points, or what have you. And it used to be like about 3 years ago, I discovered watching somebody's TikTok, I discovered people doing things like having, a birthday celebration. So one day I sat down and I logged into so many different apps to try to see how many free things can I get for my birthday. And almost all the coffee houses will have a free coffee cup, free cup of coffee. Annie's Pretzels will have a free pretzel. So one year I try to hit all the places that was in walking distance to get all the freebie stuff that I could for my birthday. And it did okay. Some people weren't even aware that their own app did this type of stuff. And other things you had to kind of read the fine print. So for me, I started at Dunkin' because that's the closest place. And then about a mile away, there's IHOP. But you have to print out the receipt, the actual printout.
The coupon, you got to print out a coupon?
You have to, they want a physical printout coupon. And there's nothing really that says it. It's a fine print type of thing. So it's like, but I have proof right here on my phone. I got the email that says, happy birthday, here's your free stack of pancakes. It's nothing it's not a full meal. It's just kind of snacky. So it's like I was able to go from, the pancakes was a bust, but there was Starbucks, and then there was the pretzel from Annie's Pretzel. Baskin Robbins, you get a free cup of ice cream. They were the one that didn't even know that their app had that. So I had to show it to them. It's like, oh, okay. So it's like I got free cup of ice cream, and then on my way back, I got free wings from Buffalo Wild Wings. So I kind of had a bit of breakfast and lunch from that. And then my sister made dinner that day, so it's like my meals for the whole day was basically free, which is walking around to get them.
A reluctant free cup of ice cream.
Exactly. Walked a mile and a half. So I walked off the ice cream just to get that. Or actually 2 miles, because it's the mile going there and the mile coming back. And then
now you have to try some special effects.
Oh, yeah. Let's see if that works for me. No? I guess I'm not getting it.
No, you're not getting. Oh, man.
All right, so.
Sometimes I've done it when I'm host and it doesn't give it to me, and I don't know why.
Right.
It's a complete mystery.
It's definitely one of those things. Oh, I haven't gone live on TikTok, so let's go live and I'll make an announcement on there.
So you need 2 screens.
Yeah, so I'm doing it on my web camera here for us. And then on TikTok Live, I'm basically have my iPhone next to the web camera. So when I'm looking towards the camera, I'm kind of looking at both, but not exactly. and it's kind of weird because on TikTok, the image is reversed. So I need to flip that image. I need to, what's called mirror my phone.
Right.
So let's do that. Let's see if that works. I usually hold up a comic, so yep, I can read it. So it's reverse correctly. So and there's some people kind of waiting. People are jumping in. So welcome to TikTok. Welcome TikTok world. Welcome YouTube. So I'm trying to simulcast on 2 different devices, and I almost had a third to go onto Instagram, but I couldn't get it to charge correctly. So it's like I know that these things can run long. And last time I did it, Instagram ended up kind of like shutting off without me even knowing. So I would end up talking on one device. So I am hi TikTok people, Ramos Comics here for my birthday. I'm level 53. As I've been joking, you can get me on YouTube, also under Ramos Comics. I'm there live with JaredOsborne.com, who we host a show on Fridays together. So, welcome. So let's see how much I could do this without going insane, or have I already gone insane?
Well, as per your instructions last night, I brought some Spider-Man comics with me.
All right, what Spider-Man comics did you bring?
I brought the Spider-Man comics that were significant to me.
Oh, excellent.
And the first one was the first Spider-Man comic I remember buying. Sometimes I always say that in 1976, when I was 9 and 10, that's when I first consider myself a comic book collector. Because that's when I first realized comic books went all in a row and made big story, and I consciously bought comic books. Before then, I had comic books, but I don't even remember most of them. They were just something that was around, that I read, that every kid had around in the early 70s. But
I do that myself. I talk about the fact that I've always read comics, but I know when I started collecting comics. That's where I say I have a divide.
Amazing Spider-Man 157 is the first Spider-Man I ever bought, myself, consciously. That nice John Romita cover.
Right. Very cool.
Who did the insides? The insides were Ross Andru and Mike Esposito.
That's what I figured from that time period it would be them.
This was not the most exciting Spider-Man era. I always liked bum Dr. Octopus. He amused me for some reason. Like Dr. Octopus was a bum for us. So he's like wooing Aunt May as a bum.
Mm-hmm. I always thought that Doc Ock and Aunt May relationship was just out there. What a creative idea that just
weird.
Boom. And the age difference was so
the ghost of Hammerhead is in this one too. It's not Hammerhead, it's his ghost.
Right.
So like I said, this was the first one I picked up myself consciously. But I didn't start it ended with him like falling out of a helicopter, I think. Yeah, because there's the helicopter in the beginning. And it's like that didn't even make me look for the next issue.
No?
I was just like, this is such a weird comic. Like I said, there's bum Dr. Octopus, there's Hammerhead's ghost, there's Spider-Man being thrown out of a helicopter. That's just weird. But I still love that cover.
It's a beautiful cover.
Just a very well done cover with some weird forced perspective in the buildings behind them. Now, what's funny is I also have. Well, what was the first issue of Spider-Man you remember buying?
I went out to as I mentioned before, I would collect comics. I would buy comics, not necessarily collect comics. So what would happen is there would be always comics in the house. My cousins read them, but they were disposable. We would read the comics.
Right, me too.
And toss them out or hold on to them until they fell apart.
Wouldn't pay attention to them.
Right.
That much.
I do clearly, my earliest comic book memory was buying a Batman comic book in a bodega. And for those who don't know, a bodega in the Bronx is basically a general store in the corner that sold a little bit of everything. newspapers, coffee. Sometimes you could get a cheese sandwich or whatever. So it was a tiny deli that would be no bigger than like somebody's living room. These stores were tiny, but and we call them bodegas. So those are the stores that we would shop in. And there was one bodega in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse that would sell back issues of comics. It's the only thing I can think of. They weren't in any order. It would just be like a Budweiser box with comics in it. And they would be sold for like 25 cents. Or that was the cover price. Because, again, this is back in the 70s. So the very first comic I remember buying for a quarter and reading was a Neil Adams Batman. It may have been the first introduction of Ra's al Ghul.
Okay.
Because it wasn't until years later that I reread that story. It's like, I think this was the Batman book. Because I remember that Robin was captured. Batman went to check on him. He left a pocket knife with Robin, so Robin was able to cut himself out. And so I believe that might have been the first Ra's al Ghul story, or within the Ra's al Ghul timeline,
right?
For lack of a better term. And so I think that was my first comic book. And then somewhere in the 80s, I was buying Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Indiana Jones, anything that kind of had a movie tie-in or television show tie-in. So I would be watching that. Be watching the movie, see, oh, there's a comic book on this movie, and then pick it up. But it wasn't really collecting yet. It was just part of the reading and dumping. It wasn't until I was in the 7th grade, New Rochelle, history class. I don't know what book they had, but Spider-Man had the black and white costume. And it was like all a buzz because then there's a group of kids that I don't really know. I mean, I know them. They're in my class, but they're not friends.
Right.
And this is like just the beginning of 7th grade. So I didn't really know anyone. But here's a group of kids talking about comics. I'm like, I like comics. Let me get into the conversation. So what are you talking about? What happens? Like Spider-Man has a new costume. Blew my mind. Because at that time period, superheroes didn't change their costumes. They may have updated. And for me,
Spider-Man never did.
Yeah. And for me, I've only was reading comics for a couple of years and just in and out. So Spider-Man was always in red and blue. I watched the cartoons. I watched the TV show. I coveted the Spider-Man Mego action figure. So it was one of those things that I wanted as a kid, but I never really got. I ended up having the Lizard out of it all.
I had all the Marvel ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in the closet somewhere.
So I had the Lizard, and that got stolen from me as a kid.
Ooh.
And the Lizard, I would consider the Lizard my childhood favorite Spider-Man book.
I had 2 Lizards. Hey,
Really?
I got
What?
balloons going.
You got the blues.
Wow.
Do you pay for StreamYard?
No.
Oh, okay. Or maybe it's you've been doing it for a while.
Could be. Who knows?
So it might be that you've been on there.
Happy birthday balloons.
Look at that. It works out for me that way.
I had 2 Lizard. I still have them somewhere. 2 Lizard Mego dolls that probably because 2 different relatives gave. So my Mego Spider-Man was always taking on the Lizard brothers.
Nice. Very cool. And then eventually when I got to Marvel, I started buying the characters I didn't have.
Right.
So there was always this love of Spider-Man. There was always this cartoon show I enjoyed. Anything comic book. For me, it was like anything that was in a comic book medium, I gravitated to. So when they had like the Scholastic book fairs, I would buy stuff like Garfield or anything that was a comic strip. Peanuts, Hagar the Horrible. I forget the one that's in the armies. The comic strip.
Beetle Bailey.
Beetle Bailey. I would pick up those books.
Yeah.
At those books fair. So getting back to the story, while we were talking about comics, I was like, all right, Spider-Man changed his costume. Characters updated their costumes somewhat, but they never changed it. Spider-Man's costume has always been red and blue to me my whole life. So for them to do the black costume blew me away. It was like so odd and weird. So I asked, how did he get the costume? And they couldn't tell me. One kid said Doctor Strange gave it to him. Another kid said Captain America. And it's like, okay, doesn't it say it in the book? And they didn't give me the book. It was just more like they were talking amongst themselves.
Mhm.
I interjected. I didn't know information. So I was like, you know what? After school, I'm going to go looking for some comic books. I'm going to actively look for Spider-Man comic books. And in New Rochelle at the time, this is New Rochelle 1983, there was only a few stores that I knew sold comic books, but I decided to hit every newsstand in the town. New Rochelle is walkable through the whole, everything's walkable really if you have enough time. But
that's what Stephen Wright says.
Yeah, so New Rochelle was one of those small towns, and I was either always on roller skates or on a bike, so I went all over the place. So I went looking, and one store had Marvel Team Up, Spider-Man, Spider-Man, and Iron Man, and Spider-Man and Moon Knight. I forget the issue number. Like I want to say 113, 114, but I always get that wrong because it might be 143. And so between those issues, it introduced me to Moon Knight, which I never, read. Right. Iron Man, that I only knew from the 60s cartoon show. Let's see if I can do this correctly. There we go. Thank you, Sleepy Reader. For those on TikTok who want to know the YouTube channel, it is also Ramos Comics or Wilson Ramos, but you can find it under Ramos Comics. So I bought these issues, read it. Rhodey was Iron Man at the time.
Okay.
So my introduction to Iron Man wasn't even Tony Stark. I just knew Tony Stark was the TV show guy. And so I'm reading it, and back then they had that lovely little yellow corner box, which basically had they told you see Secret Wars.
Right.
And Secret Wars have only just started. And again, I'm not savvy to collecting comics. So for me, it's like, all right, where do I get these books? And then realize not every newsstand had the same amount of books.
Right.
And I just happened to luck out that there was 2 books. It was right in that middle of, the Moon Knight one was the previous issue and the Iron Man one's the next issue. And the main villain was Blacklash. And so it's like, okay, it was a fun read. Let me find this Secret War books and continue to find Spider-Man books because I didn't know how many titles Spider-Man had. I only found the book Marvel Team Up was the only one that I found with Spider-Man on the cover. And then I picked up, I think my first Secret Wars book was Secret Wars 4. And he hasn't gotten the costume yet. Or it was 3, something like that. It was very early in the issues. And so it's like, so I picked it up, read that, and then of course, what's in Secret Wars? The X-Men, the Fantastic Four, all these characters, 21 superheroes that I know nothing about other than what was connected to, like, again, I saw the 60s cartoons on tape at the time. One of the cable channels would rerun them. So I think Channel 11 would have Batman, and there would be other superheroes. So I was aware of superheroes, and I knew their names from the TV medium, but not the comic books. And so I had no idea Marvel and DC were 2 different things. I just thought comics were comics. So my first Spider-Man comic book is those issues of Marvel Team Up. And then my comic collection started during the Secret Wars time, when I remember you mentioned that was about the time you kind of dropped comics.
Yep, that's when I dropped Marvel and DC.
Dropped Marvel. So for me, that was my introduction. Yeah. And from there, so in my collection, when I used to have a list, you could clearly see where it starts. They all start on the day they go to Battle World. So I got all the issues of them leaving and then coming back. And again, in those issues, the Spider-Man 252 is the first black costume cover appearance. You open up the book and you read it, and they just came back from Secret Wars. And it's like, wait a minute. So they left, they came back. Where is this thing? And I couldn't remember the name Secret Wars when I was looking for it at the comic book shop. I didn't make a list. I didn't do what. So I go to the comic book shop, and it's like, I know it was a cover with all the superheroes on it. And that's how I ended up accidentally picking up the Avengers. Because at the time, they were going through like the big winter. The Norse gods, in the Thor book, the casket of winters were opened. So New York was full of snow. And that crossed over into at least the New York characters in the comic books. And at that time, they were all New York ones. So I'm looking it up, and it's like, okay, all these superheroes are on the cover. They're the Fantastic Four. They're Avengers. This must be the book. Open it up, read it. This wasn't a book, but man, was it fun. And it's like, oh, this is how they cross over. I finally pick up the Spider-Man comic. And then it starts snowing at the end of that issue. It's like, because it connected to the event. And it gets a little box that said "See Thor." So every time that little box sent me to see something, I went to go looking for it to see it. And then that's how I ended up picking them up. And avalanche from there. I picked up everything Marvel at some point or another, starting around 1984. And the last book that I read was the X-Men. Uncanny X-Men was the last one for me to pick up. And because it had too many words in it, Claremont just loaded that book. And, you know, God bless him and John Byrne for those stories, because I did not realize they were like 19 pages. Yeah. They were full 22 pages. It had so much text in it. You felt like you read a regular comic book. So that's my comic book origin. Sleeping Reader.
The first cool Spider-Man comic that when I selected, this was the first one I remember buying. When I first started picking it up regularly, was months later, 166. And it's funny, this kind of ties in with what's going on right now. And as we sit here in the Northeast waiting for a snowstorm, I have a distinct memory of I got this comic and it came out in, and here's a little comic date deciphering for everyone out there. See how it says March right there?
Right.
Usually it was 3 months before, so that would put it in December. But you notice how it also has a copyright date there.
Yes.
Copyright 1976. That copyright date has to be the year it actually was on the stands. So if you flip open to the indicia, you can see the indicia date indeed says March. Where is it? March 1977 issue, but it's copyright 1976.
Oh,
so you
okay.
know that this came out in December of 1976 because it's 3 months before, and it still has the 1976 copyright date on it, because that's what's official. You can't put a future date on your copyright date. So if you look at the cover of any Marvel comic from this era, you can tell what year it came out. So this came out in December 1976, despite the March 1977 issue and month number. And I can remember it was just after a snowstorm. And I had finished shoveling my driveway. My neighbor was there too, probably my sisters. And I remember going to my neighbor and going, hey, let's go to 7-Eleven and get some comics now. So that's what we did. And that day, and it may also be because this comic takes place in a snowstorm in New York City. So it ties in with my memory of snow and shoveling snow out here in the New York City suburbs. So that may be why I have this distinct memory of getting this comic after a snowstorm and after shoveling the driveway. And it's funny, I knew who the Lizard was at this point. Maybe because I read some issues earlier of Friends. Maybe because I had the toy already, but I had no idea who Stegron was. But the Lizard I knew. And, of course, in this issue, the Lizard and Stegron are fighting each other. Once again, a goofy Spider-Man story where Stegron has, I don't know if later on I got the issue before this, which was the first part. And it may have been in the first part, but it's like Stegron goes into the Museum of Natural History to revive the dinosaurs. And he has like a parade of dinosaur bones down Manhattan streets. And it was just like, what? Stegron stole the dinosaurs so he can have a parade? There were so many goofy things in this era of Spider-Man. This once again, Len Wein, writer, editor, Ross Andru, and Mike Esposito. But like, and this is my Spider-Man collection started from this issue. I had from this issue to when I quit in the early '80s, all in a row of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And got some back issues later on whenever I could, but this was the first one that made me go, hey. And it ends with Spider-Man saying Merry Christmas to everyone.
Of course, over Rockefeller Center.
So just goofy stuff in this era of Spider-Man.
But I think I would have been the right age for those books at the time. Because again,
it was my era of Spider-Man.
Yeah. So for me, it was like I eventually went back and got all those issues. Because once I really liked it, I slowly just started going back. It was, the collector mentality. You want to have them all. I wasn't really aware of like the trade paperbacks. I didn't get the Fireside books until way later in life, when I didn't even know when I got it. It was more recently I discovered I have the Fireside Spider-Man. I don't have the other ones. I have my original Fireside Spider-Man. Those that I have as the reprint.
Right. I had these. We always called them the Origin books.
Right.
When I first heard someone, because Origin of Marvel Comics, son of Origin of Marvel Comics. That's when we were calling them the Origin books. So when someone first called them the Fireside books, because that's who the publisher is, I was like, what are you talking about? Oh, the Origins books?
Uh-huh.
But yeah, this is the first time I read Amazing Fantasy 15. Of course, is in here. Where is it? Does it end with? Yeah, there we go.
I am going to try to see if I could put you onto my speaker, so this way here people on TikTok can listen to the other end of the conversation, because I've just been listening. And let's see if that works. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you.
All right. So are you getting an echo from your own voice?
Let me see. I don't think I'm getting an echo.
All right.
I don't hear an echo.
All right, cool. So this way here, people who are listening on TikTok, it is my pal Jared Osborne from jaredosborne.com. You could also follow him on TikTok as well. We are doing my live attempt simulcast on YouTube as well, and I put a link in the description, but you can find me on YouTube under Ramos Comics. I believe it's under Ramos Comics as one word. So you can join the conversation there as well. When did you get that? When it was
I got this. Yeah, but when did I see what printing it is? I got this in the mid 70s, probably. This looks like a 5th printing. So figure I got it in like 77, 78, whenever this 5th printing came out. And I loved it because I loved the history of comics stuff. I loved these Origin books. I loved reading the Stan Lee behind the scenes stuff. Of course, it also allowed me to figure out that Stan Lee was just making stuff up.
Right.
You couldn't believe everything. I figured out at like 10 or 12 years old that you couldn't believe everything Stan Lee wrote in these books.
Right. Untrusted narrator, I think it's called, or unreliable.
He was an unreliable narrator. And I got that from reading Stan Lee stuff. I figured out at 10 or 12 years old, like, I don't know about this. I think he's making stuff up.
What year was that published?
74 is the original date, but I probably got it 3-4 years later.
Right.
Because this is a fifth printing. So who knows, had one printing a year. That means I got it in 79, but I don't think I got it that late. So, but first time I got to read, I think this was the only Ditko Spider-Man I had for a long time. So it was really weird because these comics are pretty mediocre. I mean, I loved them as a kid, but no one is going to tell you these are the best comics of all time.
Right.
Because they're just not. They're mediocre 1970s Marvel, which was fine at the time. I knew that, but I liked them still. So to me, like, Spider-Man was always kind of another run-of-the-mill superhero, despite the fact that it's like everybody always treated Spider-Man like he was special. I mean, the fans, or maybe the fan press, whatever I was reading, always treated Spider-Man like he was somehow special. But his comic books didn't reflect any specialness. They were so goofy. There was plenty of goofy stuff in them. And I'd only read that first Ditko thing until I got these, which are the pocket books.
Right.
And like you said, there were no trade paperbacks at the time. This was the closest we had to anything. And the origin books mostly collected old stuff from the 60s, which is what this is. So these were, I don't remember if I got all three of these at once or one at the time. I always remember having all three of them, or maybe two, but they came out, I think, in 77 was the first one, 78 and 79. Yeah, the third one came out, and you can see how the paper starts to disintegrate too on them.
Oh, yeah. A combination of boxing and
the second one, I think it was 70. Second one was 78. The first one, so they came out one a year. I don't remember getting them one a year. I might have gotten them all in 79, or else I have a vague memory of having the first two, so I might have gotten them in 78 and then the third one in 79. But this is the first chance I got to read this Ditko stuff. Look at it; it just wasn't around. There were no trade paperbacks. There weren't. Sure, they reprinted it in the early days of Marvel Tales, but by the time I was buying, they were reprinting the John Romita stuff in Marvel Tales.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I read these that I went, oh, a light. Because that's why people think Spider-Man is special, because this is some really good stuff. Like I said, the first time I got to read this Ditko stuff, you kind of got to see Spider-Man and everything that is taken for granted in these books kind of happening and developing in these books. And they're really not. That's why, to me, I to this day I say there's Ditko Spider-Man and there's everything else.
Yes.
Because these were sort of the issues where Spider-Man was special, where he was different from every other, which is also why they keep going back to this Spider-Man in the movies, because this Spider-Man is a grown adult, just like every other superhero. This Spider-Man is a teenage kid who's on the hero's journey, which didn't happen in comic books in those days. Mm-hmm. Didn't happen much in the 70s either. Even when they tried to do it, like with Nova. I don't know if you ever read Nova, the Richard Rider Nova.
I knew of it. By the time I got into comics, that book was done.
He once again was supposed to be a high school kid getting superpowers, but he was practically a grown adult too. And here he's a real, teenager getting superpowers, going on the hero's journey. And it's really, really, it opened my eyes to why people thought Spider-Man was special. Mm-hmm. And it was, I was reading these in 1978, 1979. So it was 15 years after, but I could even see, I was like, this is what makes Spider-Man special to people. It's these issues. And funny, just looking at these tiny little pocket books, I look at them now and go, "Ooh," even with my reading glasses, I can barely make sense. But as a kid, they were
Yeah,
fine.
they were great. There's so much information, more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
So I had those. I had the X-Men one, but I think the X-Men ones I had were in black and white.
Yes, there were some like that.
And it was like there was a story in there in the X-Men one that in the origin, because they did the reprint of Giant Size X-Men #1 when you had the new X-Men come in. There was a story in it that I read only in that book and not in the comic book version that had some more information about Colossus, when it's him saving his sister from the tractor. And it's like, but I didn't read that story again until later. I ended up finding whatever book they reprinted it from. So it felt to me, and I never went back to really investigate it. If they took, for the mini books, if they added more material to it that they didn't have in the comic book. It was like that for Star Wars as well. That the mini book had a little training thing with Yoda using his lightsaber. That's the only time they ever showed it in the Empire Strikes Back version of the book, of the mini book, not in the comic book. And it was like, and it happened to be one of those things where one of the guys from Marvel came looking for that book. He said he clearly remembers reading the story where Yoda uses his lightsaber, and it's the only time he's ever used in a comic book. But it wasn't in the regular Star Wars comic books. It was in those small books that had a little bit of extra material.
Looking through this now, I noticed they put more space in between the gutter, in between the panels and the gutters there, and like these gutters that go across are bigger than they should be. Yeah, so they must have wanted to fill up the space on this book. But like I said, this really made me like those Ditko years. It made me go, because like I said, these really are mediocre run-of-the-mill comics.
Yeah. I could definitely agree on that. I know that the funny thing is that, we mentioned this before on the show that some comics are bought out of habit.
Right.
Some people read a series and then they'll drop it if they don't like it. And for me, I was on Spider-Man long enough to I really enjoy these stories. And then, these are kind of like a downward on the hill, and then comes back up again. And it was definitely one of those things where it would pop up and down like that.
The telephone is ringing. Is that my mother on the phone?
I know exactly the song you're talking about, too.
The Police, right?
The Police. 1983. I think it's the self-named album. Oh, no. Synchronicity.
Synchronicity. Every girl I go out with becomes my mother at
the end.
Man, I haven't heard that in a long time.
I have not. That was one of my... I think that was the first tape that I had purchased.
I don't think that one is Sting either. It's like Stuart. It's like one of the other Police doing that. Singing, if you want to call it that.
I didn't know that. I
don't think it's. I don't think. I have a vague memory of that, but I'm not 100% sure since I haven't heard that in so long. And the other, where's the other? You mentioned. I think you had this.
Yes.
The other Fireside book. This is as close as we got to any kind of reprint from back in the day. And this was really my introduction to John Romita as the Spider-Man artist. Was once again, this stuff is post the John Romita era, except for some nice covers. And I wasn't a fan of the John Romita era. I found it kind of boring and staid, despite the fact that I like the art.
Right.
And it turns out, and I would say, in the end, I don't like Stan Lee's writing. I did not realize, because there was so much Stan Lee hype still at Marvel, that it never occurred to me till the late 70s that I just, and what really solidified it for me was She-Hulk #1. I think that came out in 79. And there was so much hype for Stan Lee coming back and writing She-Hulk #1, and it was a terrible comic.
Mhm.
I mean, 14-year-old Jared knew it was a terrible comic. And that kind of broke me out of the Stan Lee spell. Because
Right.
like I said, I never liked Marvel's Greatest Comics, which was the reprint of the Kirby Stan Lee stuff. I didn't like the John Romita era stuff, which is Stan Lee written mostly. The Ditko stuff I liked a lot, but it turns out because he was writing it a lot.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of the John Romita era. Is I just think the writing's no good.
Mhm.
I mean, like I said, I like John's art. Nothing wrong with that. And the John Lee Gil Kane combo is terrific. But like I said, this was my introduction kind of to that era, and I found it a little dull. I mean, I very much, because I think he's got the first, one of the first Stan Lee. This is a real early John Romita Spider-Man, and I loved seeing it. This is when he was still trying to draw a bit like Ditko to keep that Ditko vibe to it. And I remember even as a kid finding it interesting seeing that and seeing how he changed from the beginning to the end. That I found interesting. That's like for a little while, I didn't think I liked Jack Kirby art because the only Jack Kirby stuff I had read was the Fantastic Four and Marvel's Greatest Comics. And once again, I found that uninteresting. It turns out I didn't like Stan Lee's writing. Stuart Copeland, the drummer, also sang, Sleepy Reader says, on... But he must have done that. Every girl I go out with becomes my mother.
Mother at the end. Yep. I do have a Mothra from Trendmasters, which looks like this. I do not have a Megalon. TikToks are asking me about Godzilla.
Some Godzilla questions on TikTok.
Godzilla questions on TikTok.
Well, that's funny. The only time I bring these out these days is to show them. It's like I never can read. Matter of fact, I have to get some I don't think I currently have any reprints of the Ditko stuff.
Really? You don't have any of the Masterworks?
I used to have the omnibus that had all the Ditko stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up selling it when it went out of print. Because besides the fact that I needed the money, I never looked through it. It was just so big. Sometimes those omnibuses are too big to look through. So I had it on my shelf for like 3 years before I was like, you know what? I can use the money for this. It's out of print. It's going for a couple $100. Let's sell it. So that's what I did. Now I have to get the Masterwork. I just haven't, I have digital copies of them, of course, but I never look at that either.
Yeah, I had I got the Marvel Masterworks for the Spider-Man books when they came out. I got a lot of the Marvel Masterworks when they first came out. But a few years later, when I started working for Marvel and we were getting everything for free, it was like, all right, now I'm getting so much stuff. And I wanted to get a little extra money, and eBay was new.
Right.
I sold all my Masterworks on eBay for about $200 or $300 a pop.
Yeah, that's when they were out of print.
Yes.
And people wanted it. Because all that stuff from 10 years ago was out of print. So they were going for a good chunk of change.
So I was like, yeah, I sell them. I packed those up, mailed them out of Marvel's mailroom, and sent them on their way. I even, if they sold over a certain price, I even tossed in a Marvel No Prize in the middle of the book as a little surprise because we had a bunch of them.
Mm-hmm. What a Sleepy Reader right here.
Here we go.
Must have preferred the 70s. Yes, I much prefer. That's all. You have to keep in mind too that a lot of my Marvel 70s writing was, psychedelic Jim Starlin writing, Steve Gerber writing, which was weird as hell. Who else? Steve Englehart. His stuff was a little weird, not quite as weird as Starlin and Gerber. So and I always sort of veered toward the weirder stuff. I'm sure if I was a kid in the 60s, I would have liked Stan Lee's writing better than, say, the writing at DC Comics.
Right, because I remember looking at both set of books, and I could see why Marvel made a hit that it made in the 60s.
Yeah, yeah,
DC was already at that point by the time Marvel came out 25 years old, if not older.
right. But
Uh,
trying to read the Stan Lee stuff without Ditko and Kirby's input is really tough. I
right.
mean, Stan Lee and Gene Colan's Daredevil is dull as dishwater.
I never read those. I only
Besides the
read,
art being nice,
I read the stuff that he did with Ditko and Kirby.
right?
Uh, and it took me a while to enjoy Kirby. And it may
Hmm.
have been the same thing as you mentioned. It was most likely with Stan's writing.
It wasn't what made me like Kirby was when he started writing Captain America for himself, the Mad Bomb story, which I actually started. I started collecting my first Captain America issues were like issue 206. As a kid, I thought the Lee reprints were genius. Now I prefer the writers you mentioned. To me, as a kid, you have to understand, I'm in the late 70s too. He was more in the early 70s. To me, Stan Lee was the weird uncle who thought he was hip.
Right.
So he was just this, and to me, like weird, and like 10 years ago, he was like trying to write hip six, because by the late 70s, hip 60s stuff was passe anyway. So seeing someone try to write like sort of fake hip 60s stuff for me as a kid in the late 70s was like, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So I just never could get into the Stan Lee stuff, but it was I can still remember the issue too. I think it was 206. It was the Jack Kirby written and drawn where Captain America is taking on a guy called the Swine, who is like a South American dictator. And that issue just fascinated me as a kid because it wasn't like anything else. There's even this scene, which I still remember to this day, where, like I said, the Swine was this South American dictator. And Cap, I forget, I didn't even know how Cap got there because he's there, and South America is taking on this dictator, trying to kind of help out the locals. And this dictator used, violence or whatever to keep. But at one point, this dictator, the Swine, what he did was he had this guy who was his rival. He had him in prison and was starving him. And then he let him out of prison to this banquet. So the guy started gorging himself with food. And that's where, as a kid, I found out if you were starving and you gorge yourself with food, you die.
Yeah.
I learned that from a Captain America comic, from the Swine killing this guy this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that just didn't happen in any other comic. It was just like, it was just kind of, and it was like a 2-part series. And I only had those 2 issues. I didn't start collecting Captain America until like 6 months later. So at the end of the second issue, Lee really was dull without Kirby. I recently tried the Lee Buscema Thor and nothing happens. Yeah. And the Silver Surfer, I can remember the first time I because once again, the Silver Surfer was Stan Lee's favorite. It was kind of very hyped in the late 70s. I've looked back on fondly when I finally got to read those Stan Lee Silver Surfers, they were terrible. Terrible. So anyway, it's like, and at the end of this 2-part Swine story, who shows up on the last page but Armin Zola. It was the first appearance of Armin Zola. And that was just the weirdest thing ever. Because those of you who don't know Armin Zola, he for some reason decided to put his brain to a safer place. So he's got his brain in his chest.
Right, in the robot body.
Where his head, and he's got like a giant face in his chest and stomach.
Some sort of TV screen.
Weird-looking thing. That's the weird-looking guy that showed up at the end of this Swine story. And I was just like, whoa. And then I think the last when I first started picking it up, the last two Kirby issues I had too with this villain called the Night Flyer, who the Night Flyer's superpower, if you want to call it that, was he calculated probabilities down to the second. So when he fought you, he's already won the fight because he's calculated everything out to what was going to happen. So he spent 2 issues running Cap through hoops because of the because he's calculated everything out down to the last second. That's how he won fights. And it was just weird, out there, fun stuff that was real. And that's when I fell in love with Kirby stuff. Was that I later went back and got the Mad Bomb stuff years later, which I really liked too. But that Night Flyer and the Swine stories were 2 of my favorites.
For me, it was like I would read a book. If I don't know if I could ever say that I disliked Stan's writing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I would read a book, I would take it at face value what it was, and I would move on to the next thing. So for me, I think I was, because being an artist myself, with the Silver Surfer, I would be more lost in John. John's artwork. The art was, just be staring at that, and the words were almost secondary.
That's because the words were terrible. You couldn't read them.
Yeah, exactly. Because for me, what I would joke about Silver Surfer would be the melodrama of my love, Shalabar. I sacrificed everything for her. But was she really that great looking?
But Bunch, our friend Bunch, worked with us at Marvel. When I first heard him make fun of those surfers, because he hated them, his way of making fun of those surfers was like, oh my God, the Silver Surfer, oh shallow gal, how I miss you, shallow gal. So it's like, I can't call her anything but shallow gal now. But the other thing that made me love Kirby was same Fireside book, only the Captain America one. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was a reprint of the Kirby Captain America stuff, the Lee and Kirby Captain America stuff from the 60s. And it was real good. There were such good Jack Kirby fight scenes in there that I was like, wow, this guy is really good. And it also, was one of those that led me to believe that Stan Lee wasn't writing this stuff, since, and I can also remember, what was it? Marvel's Greatest Superhero Battles. I don't know if you know that one. It was another Fireside book.
I remember that one. I do remember that one.
And there was a particular one it reprinted, the Iron Man Submariner. There was like one issue of Iron Man Submariner that I think was printed like right before Iron Man #1 and Submariner might like continued the story from their split book or something. But Gene Colan did the first half of the story. Then, as Stan Lee explains in the text, he got sick, so Jack Kirby stepped in and drew the second half of the story. And just I was a Gene Colan fan. Gene Colan's all right. But just the difference between Gene Colan and Jack Kirby was so obvious, it was crazy. Because just the power and the storytelling in the Jack Kirby fight scenes between Iron Man and Submariner were mind-blowing. And it really, I remember reading at the time, made me go, wow, that Jack Kirby is good. And there's really a huge difference when different artists draw the same story.
I think it's like the only omnibus that I own is Captain America.
Okay.
And I had, I don't know if I won it or a friend of mine won it at like some kind of trivia night. And my friend just gave it to me.
I think, I don't know if I might have, like I said, I ended up selling a bunch of my omnibuses when they went out of print. But I had 3 Captain America omnibuses. I had the Ed Brubaker Captain America omnibus, which I sold for like $200 when it went out of print. I had the Jack Kirby, like Tales of Suspense stuff omnibus, and I had the Jack Kirby Mad Bomb omnibus. I think I may have one of them still. I think I may have the Jack Kirby 60s omnibus, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look around. It used to be right back there on one of my shelves, but I think it either got moved or I sold it. Oh no, there it is. I do still have it. Pardon me. I see it now. I don't think it's the Mad Bomb one, it's the 60s stuff one. That might be the only Captain America omnibus I have left.
Yeah, the one I have, I never opened it. It's still in its cellophane because I figured it's like I end up winning that in a trivia type thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted the Spider-Man one, of course. So it's like, all right, I'll keep this sealed. And maybe I could find someone who has a Spider-Man one and trade them. So, and I don't have it in this room. That's why I can't look up what exactly books are in there. I'm almost positive it's definitely Kirby stuff.
Right.
And so I've been slowly moving things to another room, which is where I have my hardcovers, my trade pass, so my Masterworks, all my hardcover books. That's the one. That's the
this is the Tales of Suspense stuff going into Captain America number 100 on the back there.
So yeah, that's the omnibus that I have.
Yeah. This has got that Kirby stuff in it that was in the Fireside book.
Right.
That made me go, wow. And there's another one, speaking of Tales of Suspense, that made me realize that Stan Lee, well, I kind of knew it by then, because Stan Lee wasn't writing everything he said he wrote. To me, the best Kirby is New Gods and Mr. Miracle. I'll still take, I do like them. I'll still take that Captain America Mad Bomb run from my childhood a lot. I like that a lot. I didn't read the Kirby 70s stuff until the Fourth World omnibuses came out. That's the first time I got to read all of it. I had some issues here and there as a kid, but since I didn't buy much many DC comics, and it was also slightly before my time. That was the early 70s. I was the late 70s. And there was no place to get it. For years, there was no place.
They weren't really reprinted or anything like that. And for me, it was like the Kirby stuff that I knew were only the Kirby stuff that he did at Marvel, because I didn't get any of the DC stuff. And the few times that I found DC stuff was like when he was doing like some of the superpowers stuff. And to me, I felt like they just put Kirby onto those books just to put Kirby onto those books. Like it felt to me that DC didn't know what to do with Kirby while he was there.
Right. Yeah, I never had that 2001 Treasury edition, but I've seen it, and it's kind of wild. I like that. And you know what it was? What's so weird about that Fourth World stuff? As it took that stuff a long time to be beloved like it is now. There was, because like I said, you could find that stuff in the dollar bins all through the 80s and 90s.
Right. They weren't hard to get. And I think that's where even like the Eternals is how I end up getting those books. And that was
the Eternals. I like the Eternals too. That's one of my favorite Kirby things.
It didn't do anything for me. Or am I thinking of the Inhumans? I might be thinking of the Inhumans.
The Eternals, I had some of the Eternals stuff as a kid. It was the cosmic powered Hulk, I think, that got me to buy the Eternals to begin with. There was a weird story with the cosmic powered Hulk, but it also took me a little while to catch on to the fact that this wasn't the Marvel Universe. This was Kirby's own separate universe from the Marvel Universe. Hence I don't know if you've ever gone back and read those original Eternals, but it was, a matter of fact, it was Roy Thomas, I think, after Kirby left, who tied them into the Marvel Universe. which is one of the reasons I've never liked any post Kirby Eternal story.
Right.
Because especially the Jack Kirby Eternal series, once again, did not take place in the Marvel Universe. And it was about these two groups of immortals fighting each other, the Deviants and the Eternals. And they've been fighting each other for thousands of years. Meanwhile, there's the Celestials are coming back to judge the Earth, to see if they're going to live or die. And the humans don't know anything about this. And the Celestials were supposed to be like, and they were in the Jack Kirby world. They were God. They were God. You could not affect the whole point of them was you could not affect their judgment. They were so far above everything that they were gods. And even the gods on earth, the Eternals, could do nothing against the Celestials. They were just, but when they got tied into the, Marvel Universe, they immediately became just, the next power level in the Marvel Universe. And if you have the Eternals, the Celestial killing sword, you can kill them.
Right.
The whole point of them was they were unkillable.
Mm-hmm.
They were a force of nature you could do nothing against. But that doesn't work in the Marvel Universe, but it worked in the Eternals universe.
Right. It was its own thing. I don't think that was... For me, I don't think while reading the Eternals or the few issues that I read, I even got that it was a different world.
Right.
There was nothing really to indicate that to me. It had the same cover dress as all the other Marvel comics. It for me, it was like it was in the Marvel Comics universe, but it wasn't, for lack of a better term, it wasn't an important enough event for the Marvel superheroes to deal with it. And it was like, okay, I'm not too sure what they were going with it. And so, I think some of the spacey stuff that Kirby did, I didn't gravitate to. So I knew about the New Gods, and I only knew about them because they crossed over into Superman books.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, this is interesting. And I know I have like the first appearance of the Forever People.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading that and enjoying that, but I was really more reading it for, here's a Superman book. These might be Kryptonians. So for me, that was intriguing just to find out, it was its own thing. And it was like, okay. And then I wasn't reading Jimmy Olsen or any other books that Kirby would kind of be on, bringing in the First World characters.
Do you remember the 90s reprints of Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff?
The black and white stuff?
The black and white stuff. It was in such low demand that DC wouldn't even print it in color. They just took one of the color plates. I don't remember the sad thing is Kirby's 70s work is all unfinished epics. Yeah. And like I said, Jack wasn't the hero he became later in the 70s. So like a lot of the younger guys called him Jack the Hack at Marvel.
Right. They weren't really aware of it. 62 Lefty Blues. Thank you for the birthday wishes.
And even like amongst the kids who bought comics that I knew growing up, I was the only Jack Kirby fan. Everyone else thought he was too old-fashioned and drew things square. That was the criticism of him. Yeah, he draws everything square. It's a miracle Captain America's shield isn't square. I remember one of my friends saying. But
it took me a while to kind of really get into Kirby, because at first, to me, that was like, I appreciate who he was and what he did, but he wasn't at Marvel at the time, so I didn't get really an introduction to him until years later, when other artists that I knew was really into Kirby.
Well, he was really gone by the time you got around.
Yeah, there was nothing Kirby at all.
Right.
Even the World's Greatest Comics, the reprint books, was doing the Roy Thomas stuff.
One of my favorite, probably my most favorite Kirby series is actually one of his last ones, Captain Victory. I love Captain Victory. I actually had a subscription to it when it came out from Pacific. I was probably in high school, I think, when it came out. But I love Captain Victory. A lot of people don't like it. It's my favorite Kirby because it's got all the over-the-top Kirby elements in it, and I just find it a lot of fun. But like the New Gods was the Kirby Fourth World was so like unbeloved in the 90s that it couldn't even get a color reprint. It got that terrible, I still have them here too.
Right.
I think I got them from Marvel. It's getting some thumbs up for Kirby.
And I only got into like Kirby's other stuff because Topps were reprinting or doing more stuff with their stuff, which is Captain Victory.
Right.
And like they had a whole line, or was it Image? It might have been Topps and Image. It was like
there was right. A lot of the Image guys really wanted to get Kirby some money and stuff, so they were giving him work to do. And Topps had a whole line of working over Kirby's stuff, so they were really looking to help Kirby out because he was a hero of theirs, and so they were all doing that. But no, what's funny about the Eternals? It wasn't. I had maybe half the issues of Eternals growing up because once again, you couldn't get them anywhere. It wasn't until those nutty square fingers, that really put people off. Marvel put out the Eternals omnibus was actually one of the first omnibuses Marvel put out. I don't know when, the aughts. Maybe 2006, 2007, whenever it came out. And I remember I was always looking at it. I'd never bought an omnibus before. And I was looking at it. I was always looking at it on Amazon, but it was like $100. It's one of the first ones that came out. I was like, I really want to read all of the Eternals. And it really would be cool to have it in an omnibus. Like I hadn't gotten any omnibuses before. It was one of the first ones they put out. And I hemmed and hawed and never got it. And of course it went out of print and then the price shot up even more.
Yeah.
So I was like, I wonder how much, the issues go for on eBay, the original issues. I got all the issues of the Eternals, mint condition, shipped for $20. I was like, screw the omnibus. This is, this is like, 2006, 2007, before anyone cared about the Eternals. There was no movie on the horizon.
Right.
So the original issues were so dirt cheap on eBay. I went, I don't need the omnibus. I can get the originals for, a sixth of the price.
And it's definitely easier to read them.
Yes.
And it's to read that tome of books. Yeah. Luckily, Kirby has been redeemed in the age of omnibuses and other giant books. I have 5 or 6 Kirby artists.
Oh yeah, he is the aughts in the golden age of reprints. Made Kirby king again.
Yeah,
because by the late 70s, he was kind of forgotten all through the 80s. I mean. And I think the 90s Image guys really, their love for him really revived him a little bit, but it took all those I also think it took settling the Marvel lawsuit.
I think it did also, because I remember, again, by the time I got into high school, the only time Kirby kind of like was talked about was the Village Voice article about him wanting his artwork back.
Yeah.
And that was 80, between 86 and 89.
Right. I remember all the Kirby stuff you'd see was about how he got ripped off.
Yes. So that's the only thing you knew about Kirby. So I asked a friend of mine, what is this about? Because he was more into knowing the history of comics. And it's like, he wants his artwork back. And to me, being in high school, learning about advertising, where they're telling me, oh yeah, everyone keeps, the company keeps the artwork. The artwork doesn't belong to the artist. Yeah. This was that they were telling me about, and was like, oh, but remember, don't sell your great characters because Superman was stolen.
Right.
But these were what the art teachers would be teaching us, but not have a history of comics. They just know, they know some of the horror stories about it. It would always be, don't get into comics. They're just going to steal your stuff.
Right.
My friends on TikTok,
That's
thanks for the birthday wishes. I do appreciate it. I'm live on YouTube, so I'm not listening to a documentary. Some people are asking, was I watching the documentary? It's like, no, live talking about the history of comics on my YouTube page, which I've posted, and it's also under Ramos Comics as one word.
And this is what goes on every Friday night before you go on TikTok.
Yes, this is the Friday night show that I talk about and I mention on my Friday night TikTok shows.
Sleepy Reader says, yes, after the settlement, there was a rush of oversized Marvel reprints. There was.
Yeah.
For Kirby.
Right before the settlement, there was, I think, I could only guess, is because they reprinted the Simon and Kirby stuff. Fighting American.
Okay.
Was one of the books that were printed, and that's how I got to meet Joe Simon. Was because by the time I was working in comics, Kirby had already passed. So I started in March 1994, and Kirby passed about 6 months before that.
It was in 93, right?
I think he passed in 93. So I never got to meet him. But I got to meet Joe Simon because Marvel had reprinted the Fighting American books. And that was, I think, right after or during the time they reprinted those Simon and Kirby Captain America books that, as we know, the printing plate shift. I was there when the publicity department found out about it. Because we were like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? So they had called up Gary Guzzos, who I was working for at Marvel. They called him up, and he's like, what are you talking about? Let me investigate. And that's when I met Peter Sanderson. And for those who don't know out there, Peter Sanderson was the guy who ran the Marvel Library. He was also the continuity editor. So
back when there was such a thing.
Yeah. So he had copies of the books. So that was the first time I went into the bound book room, into the library, which, spoilers, I eventually became the head of the library. And it was like, the way I got that promotion was, hey, could you hold the key to the library and let anybody in when they need to get let in? So it's like that. So that's how I went from running art returns to running the library. So the first time going into the library and meeting Peter Sanderson was to see a printed copy of that Captain America book, which for those who don't know, it was infamous because somebody at the printer,
a disgruntled employee who was leaving, had drawn a penis on Bucky on the yellow plate. And so it was not noticeable unless you were looking for it. And Bucky was strapped to a table too.
Was it a table? I thought he was in a bed. I thought he was like sick in a bed.
No, I remember I could be remembering it wrong. I thought he was strapped down. Maybe he was, either way, he was lying down.
So he was lying down. They drew the person drew a penis, and it was on the yellow plate, and there would be no way for anyone to see that because that was done at the printer. So there would not have been a copy sent to Marvel for approval, because I don't think you would have seen it at that point, because they would have probably snuck in the plate after the proofs were sent over.
Right.
I would imagine that's probably how it got through. And again, it was yellow. You could not really see it well over the beige or whatever color.
Right. You had to be looking for it to find it.
It had to be pointed out. And that's when we discovered it. And it was like, all right, so what do we do now? I don't think they were ever recalled.
No.
And and I think it was one of those, we won't point it out and not say anything about it. It was the whole no news is the news.
It was a 2-volume set of Golden Age Captain America, right?
Yes. So and it came in. It had a slip. There were 2 hardcover books that was in a slip cover.
Right.
So it was a whole package deal. If I remember correctly, I had a pretty large price.
Oh yeah, it was expensive.
Yeah.
Not a cheap book.
And I think what Marvel decided to do, at least in our department, the publicity department at the time, they were just like, we won't say anything. Just leave that as one of those things. And I don't know, other than being there at Marvel when they pointed it out, I don't recall seeing it talked about anywhere else.
Yeah, I haven't
I don't
heard
think
anyone mention it, but
I don't
people
think
who were
it
there
got,
at the time,
yeah,
like
I don't
me
think
and
it got
you.
into the trade magazines. And again, I do not know who called
Yeah.
to ask about it.
Huh.
But it was one of those things. Hey, check this out.
Huh.
Within Marvel, but I don't think we ever published it outside that time.
And another big Spider-Man book from my youth is, of course, With Enough Time, Stan Lee will leave a footnote to Kirby and Ditko. Maybe we have Superman versus Spider-Man. This was like a huge book. I didn't buy this off the shelf. I don't know where I got this copy. I think I got it along the way. And my friend and neighbor growing up had a copy of Superman versus Spider-Man. So I always read his. I don't know if this is his copy or not, or if there's a piece of tape down the middle of the spines because it must have been fallen out. It's been read so many times. But this, of course, was a big event. What year did this come out? 76?
I believe it was 76.
Let's see what 76, copyright 76. Like I probably didn't read it till 77 or 78, but this is actually a good comic.
Yeah,
I mean, they did a nice job on this. And as I didn't find out till decades later, it's credited to written by Jerry Conway, drawn by Ross Andru, and inked by Dick Giordano. But Neil Adams redrew a lot of the stuff in here.
That I didn't know.
Yeah.
Did he redraw the Superman stuff?
A lot of the Superman figures are redrawn, and you can tell. Once you know that, you can tell.
Yeah.
And he just took it upon himself to do it. Because the page, where's that one? The pages were in that Superman figure right there. Looks like Neil Adams. There's more in here that look like Neil Adams. Because, well, not only was Ross Andru having eye trouble at the time, but Dick Giordano worked at Continuity Studios, which was Neil Adams' studio. Other artists could rent space from him, and he did. So Dick Giordano had the pages in, and the story goes that at night, Neil Adams would see some of the pages and go, this is a major event. I got to fix these up. So he ended up...
I did not know that story.
Yeah, fixing up a lot of the pages, a lot of the, especially the Superman figures. There we go. There's that big splash that I'm pretty sure he fixed up some of the figures on that, especially that Superman there.
Yeah.
And I think it's a uncredited Terry Austin did all the backgrounds. And I know Bob Wyachek has told me he did some of the backgrounds on this too, because he was in Continuity Studios at the time too. So all these buildings are Terry Austin.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And yeah, you can see Neil Adams' handiwork in like that Superman figure right there.
Right. The moment you said Neil Adams, I realized, thinking about it, it's all the Superman stuff.
Yeah.
It's definitely there. You can see it. The first time that I realized that artists were going uncredited in books happened to be in Secret Wars. Because Secret Wars was written by Jim Shooter. It was drawn by Mike Zeck, and it was inked by John Beatty. And as I was looking at the artwork years later, it was some stuff like, wait, this doesn't look like Mike Zeck. This looks like Art Adams. And there is a page that Art Adams may have inked. And it wasn't until I was talking to not Mark Morales. It was, I think it was Mark Morales, inker. No, I'm sorry, Keith Williams.
Okay.
Keith Williams, longtime Marvel inker. I was talking to him, and he worked on Secret Wars. He said towards the end of the series, it was so backed up that there was a bunch of people helping out that went uncredited. And it was, when I was working at Marvel, I saw that. I'm uncredited on a bunch of pages at Marvel, and even when I did full books, the funny thing about it is I have one here, X-Men Black Sun, that I colored. It is the 5th issue 5 of the series, and Mike. Let me double check. So it was edited by Mike Martz.
Okay.
So he had hired me to work on this book to color it, and I colored, I think, 75% of the book, but it's credited to Tom Smith. Just because it was so backed up that it was I colored almost the whole book, but I'm not credited for it.
Here's
that's the way it is in comics.
One of my favorite parts of this is the cover sketches. Right. How a cover was born, I think they call it, right? And I loved this behind the scenes stuff because you never got to see it.
No, not at all. You never really got to see what pencils look like at all until
what
later.
Sketches look like. Just the idea that they did 3, 4, 5 different poses before they got it right.
That's why I picked up magazines like Comic Scene.
Oh yeah, anything I could get.
Yeah, Comics Interview. All that stuff would just give you the artwork of the pencils and what it looked like. The how to draw comics the Marvel way became a big book that just went to school.
I like that one a lot.
And it was again, I still have the hardcover version of that book that a friend of mine gifted to me in high school, and completely falling apart. And I ended up, getting reprints later. That Superman and Spider-Man story, the first time I read it was in those pocket-sized books.
Oh, wow.
So they made one that had both stories of Superman and Spider-Man. So we have that one, which is the Ross Andrews story.
And the one nobody cares about.
And the John Buscema one. That I think is the cover to the mini book. And that's how I read it. I read that book first, before the other Superman. So that's John Buscema drawing it. I don't recall who else was credited in that book.
Hold on. Listen to these credits.
Okay.
Script by Jim Shooter. Pencils by John Buscema. Figures inked by Joe Sinnott. Backgrounds inked by Terry Austin, Klaus Janson, Bob McLeod, Al Milgrom, Steve Lealoha, Walt Simonson, Joe Rubenstein, Bob Layton, and Bob Wyacek.
I have a feeling all those inkers were in the same studio.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I know that Rubenstein and Bob Wyacek were both at continuity. Terry Austin was at continuity at one time. I don't know about everybody else, but I know those 3 were at least. But yeah, this is the Superman versus Spider-Man that nobody cares about. I don't even remember it. It wasn't particularly good.
The main villains were Dr. Doom and the Parasite, and Wonder Woman makes an appearance. I do enjoy that book. But again, Buscema art.
Yeah, I don't remember it at all. I can't even say I don't like it because I don't remember it in the least. I just know this is the one no one ever talks about.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. So that one I had, again, because I don't have many Treasury books.
Yeah.
I have maybe 2, if even. Okay. I have a holiday one that had a big reef on it. And
they had a couple of holiday ones.
They had a few holiday ones, and I only had that. I don't think the problem that I had with Treasuries, because by the time they came out and they were gone.
Right.
They were only whatever the run was. So when I went looking for the Superman and Spider-Man one, it was too expensive. But by the time I was looking for it, they already reprinted it a few times. It appeared in trade paperback. So I ended up getting it in that kind of format. Because me, I love a crossover. And for those characters to be crossing over, it was I went looking for them and then finding them in reprint version. So my problem with Treasury editions in general was that they were a bit expensive, and for me, I couldn't store them. I couldn't figure it out how to store them. I didn't know that they made bags and boards for them until years later.
Oh, they didn't make bags and boards for them when I was buying them.
Right. So it's like
there was no place to get that stuff.
Exactly. So, and it's like, and to get bags just for comics growing up in the 80s in a case, because this is before I discovered a comic book shop also.
Right.
So they was one of the newsstands that would sell the bags for 10 cents a piece.
Ah.
And it's like, but my comic book is costing me 60 cents.
That's a lot.
Like, that's a lot of money for a bag. Not knowing that for now, $4.95, you could get 100 bags.
Yeah.
So it's cheaper now to get the bags than it was back then. And no boards. They didn't even exist yet.
That's what I hardly ever use backing boards because I'm before the backing board era.
Right.
As a kid, the delusion was that they were drawing the pictures in one shot, and playing a musical instrument was magic too. 62 Lefty Blues. So yeah, you didn't think about what it took to make a drawing.
Growing up, I had no idea what it took to draw comics. Even seeing something as like Professor X's head, bald head, there was just this curve on it. That's like, how does someone do that? Was it mechanical? You would see, in my early career, I saw printing plates for comics. So I didn't know, did someone carve those? I have no idea.
Right.
No idea. It was just pencil and paper. So I didn't, no idea about the production of it.
Yeah.
And I think my eyes opened up so much when I saw original artwork at Marvel.
Ah.
And I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw whiteout on the page. To know that, you can make a mistake and it can be fixed. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I really got to see original artwork to see what was the process. Because you read about the process that Marvel's 5 Fabulous Decades, that big book kind of walked you through the printing process, through the creation of a comic book. The first time I saw a comic book strip, the first time that I saw color guides. Once I picked up the Marvel Tryout book.
Oh yeah,
that gave you information as well.
I remember. I loved that when it came out.
Yeah, and it's and I still have it.
I loved it. I couldn't do it, but I loved it.
I was too intimidated to even attempt it, so I bought the book just to own the book.
I tried it, but I was no good. I got intimidated after I tried it.
Right. Oh, okay. It was like I saw it. It's like I love comic books. It's a great looking medium. I as an artist, it's like I loved it. I don't think I'm going to do it. And then it wasn't until I was working in comics that I was like, oh, I can do this. This is not as hard as I thought it was. And the best way to learn how to do comics is to do comics.
Oh yeah,
it's his own thing. Like all the stuff that I learned in art school was great for the stuff that I did, graphic design, production, and all that.
It applies to comics, but you actually have to do them.
Yes, so it was like one of those things. Until you actually practice it and do it, it kind of clicks, and it's like, oh, this is what it meant. And even going back to how to draw comics the Marvel way.
Oh, that was useless.
You started practicing what was going on there, then you kind of get an idea. But they were also using tools that kind of wasn't being used anymore. So for me, it's like I couldn't figure out certain things. It's like, why use a brush? A pen tool is so much easier to outline the panels.
As much as I loved that book, it was useless to me.
Okay.
John Buscema was so far advanced that it was like, see, this is all you have to do. Draw like John Buscema. And it's like, I can't do that. Following Jared on YouTube for years, it seems like you made up your own art process, all your own. I did. I But for my comic book stuff back in the day, it wasn't that far off. But my drawing veered so far away from comic book drawing over the years. Like how I drew in my 20s was completely different from how I drew in, say, my late 20s. Even my early 20s to my late 20s, I discovered how I draw.
Right.
And it's not like John Buscema.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that at the beginning, but I still believed I could.
but it's like what I miss of being an amateur artist was the cockiness that I had, because I didn't know any better. And my early Marvel years, I got really cocky because it's like, so I'm drawing every day, I'm getting better. I did a Spider-Man pinup that I walked into the Spider-Man office like, if you guys need to use this, you go ahead and use this.
Yeah.
Let me know. And that sat in Ralph Macchio's office for about a year or two when I realized they're not going to use it. So I went back and got it back. I had told Ralph in about, so at the time it was 95, 96. Spider-Man 400 is like 6 years away. It's in the horizon, but it's far enough away. I was like, I'm going to draw Spider-Man 400. I'm going to draw Spider-Man 400, and the Lizard is going to appear in it. That's how cocky I was.
Wow.
And Ralph was like, all right, sounds good. And it's like, and then, issue 400 came out. It had Ramos on the cover. It was Humberto Ramos.
See, I was never cocky like that just because I can't draw like John Buscema. That's not how I draw and it was weird for me because, of course, when I was at Marvel, I loved Marvel from when I was a kid. But I hadn't read Marvel comics in a good 5 years since I got there. And sure, I would have loved to have drawn Marvel comics. Who wouldn't?
Right.
But I in no way had the skill set to draw like a Marvel superhero artist. But I would try sometimes. And it would be very, very frustrating. Because when you're in your early 20s, it's real, and you don't know the way I draw is so far from how a Marvel comic is drawn.
Right.
That coming to the realization that I ain't ever going to do that, even though I'm right next to it and am a skilled artist. Drawing superheroes from Marvel Comics is such a specific, narrow thing that if you don't fit into that box, you don't fit into that box. Sorry, kid. And that was what it was hard for. And I kind of knew that all along, but didn't know it. And that kept me from being cocky.
Right.
But didn't know it in the front of my mind until I was in my later 20s. And I just put that out of my head from then. I was like, you know what? I'm never going to draw for Marvel. Who cares?
Right.
I don't have to.
So for me, it was I was drawing like McFarlane.
Right.
When I worked in the comic book shop. So I was doing images, pinups, and they were being hung up in the comic book shop.
Right.
It was basically a McFarlane swipe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting used to drawing kind of like that at that time, 92, 93. And then started working at Marvel. And then I was learning comics at Marvel. So I was learning the language. And it was like, so my first real stuff was coloring. And all right, I got that down packed. Inking, I got that down packed. So I was learning each step of the way and then applying it to it. And I was art directing because, again, as I said, I started in the the publicity department. And I was working under Heidi Balaban. She was the art director. She went on maternity leave. So I was the art director. So I was designing posters. I was designing T-shirts, all the convention stuff I was designing. We put together the first printed and only printed Daily Bugle issue. I wish I still had copies of that. And so we printed physical copies of the Daily Bugle that we're giving out at conventions.
Okay.
So it's like, all right, so I got I got that part, the art directing part down packed. I was doing inking, I was doing assistance to inking, and it's like, all right, it's just a matter of time before my penciling gets strong and my storytelling. That's where the cockiness came in.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And it just never happened. I lost the cockiness real quick, not too soon after that. Oh, Paulo's here.
Paolo's here. Hey there,
what's up?
Paolo.
I noticed you there. I hope you weren't waiting in the waiting room.
No,
too
no,
long.
no, not even a minute.
Oh,
I
okay,
was-
great. Welcome.
I was down in the cafe with my dad.
Oh, all right, very
Ah.
cool.
Yeah.
We're just talking about early days at Marvel and what it's like to be an artist there. Not ever going to be drawing for Marvel.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're in production, you get stuck there, right? You don't.
Yes.
You don't
that
get
was
it.
a thing. That was a thing too, because despite the fact that, like I said, I don't draw. Well, let's see, 62 Lefty Blues. Listening to Mike Mignola talk about how much fear he had of being outed for not having that style. Then he came up with Hellboy. Oh, it's history. Okay.
Yeah, he found a way to make his style work.
Right.
I think I missed an earlier thing that was said.
62 Lefty Blues. I think the point you made last night about Marvel hires people that draw the way they want to book the book. Yeah, that's it too. The style is set by the people hiring. And that's what was one of the frustrating things too about like the early 90s. You see all these guys. First of all, Rob Liefeld broke all the rules of drawing. And I really didn't like his stuff. I still don't like his stuff. I find it too clunky and whatever. But whatever, people love it. And he was actually really easy to imitate because most people could do stuff as terrible as him, but he had something that imitators didn't have. I like it. I don't even know what, like, I'm not a fan of his style, but he had something that captured people. And imitating that something, Rob Liefeld imitators never had whatever that ephemeral something was. So it was like, I can, you'd be like, I can do the same stuff Rob does, and you probably could.
Right.
But you wouldn't get, that wasn't going to set you on the path to glory.
Yeah, there was and I think that's also what made me a little cocky
Right.
back then, because I thought I could probably draw better than Rob.
Yeah.
And it was cockiness. It was Rob was the least artist that was going on at Marvel at the time that I liked.
Right.
I always attribute to the fact that I used to say, yeah, kids like his artwork because they're drawing like they are.
Right.
That was my rationale of why Rob was getting work.
My LCS owner came up with the same rationale.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I saw that popularity, but me, I gravitated more to Eric Larson's artwork because I liked the craziness with that because it was just right off the same kind of wackiness that McFarlane was doing. And to get way back about being a longtime Spider-Man fan, how it ebbed and flowed, I followed John Romita Jr.'s career, ups and downs. He was very much similar to his dad's artwork because his dad was inking them. So you could see that in the art in the early John Jr. stuff. And then there was his experimental years. That was a bit much. It was when he was drawing Spider-Man at one point. He was drawing it, and it kind of looked like that 80s artist that was on all those Duran Duran covers. Nigel. I feel that John Jr. went through kind of a Nigel stage.
Yeah.
While he was still developing his art to become, I think he doesn't really gain that style until Daredevil.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched it up and down, and Spider-Man was going through those up and down. So by the time McFarlane came in, Spider-Man, the artwork was fairly boring.
Yeah.
It was a soap opera with him and Mary Jane. It continued to be a soap opera. I ate that stuff up anyway. But when McFarlane came in, that was something just bright and new, to me. And then that started that whole thing with the Image guys. And again, that I think attribute to the cockiness of me being young, going, I could do that. I wasn't until like Rob showed up. It's like, I think I could do that. Because then you had all the Rob clones pop up. It's like, yeah, I don't even have to worry about backgrounds anymore.
Yeah. You could at least be a clone. That's easy. Those guys were terrible.
You know, and so you're learning the art style. But again, like I mentioned, and Pablo wasn't here for it, it's like I studied the coloring of it, and I was already doing coloring for Marvel.
Right.
And I was studying the inking, and I started doing the inking for Marvel. When I got to penciling, bang, I hit the brick wall. It's like, I don't think I could do this. Oh, maybe I should not have walked into the Spider-Man's office and go, I'm going to draw Spider-Man 400 one day for you guys. And it's like, yeah, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, like I can remember another thing that made me realize how things work too was, I'm good with a brush. Like, you know, painting was what I studied in college. So when I first got to Marvel, it was when I first started inking. I still have all my practice inking pages. I was good. I was a good inker.
Mm-hmm.
Practiced over a lot of Marvel pages. To this day, I'm really good with them. I mean, better with a brush now, of course. I've been doing it for 40 years.
Right.
But I could see, because I was in the, especially in those days before things were computerized, because I was in the bullpen, I was never getting work. Yeah. That's just the way the place ran. And I can also, and that made me go, oh, I see how this place doesn't matter. My skill level as an inker does not matter.
Yeah.
I was in the bullpen, and bullpenners don't get that type of freelance work. And I can remember, and you could see like friends of the editors who, especially in the early 90s, who were terrible inkers getting inking work because they're friends. And it also reminds me of, what's his name? Oh my goodness, Hector Collazo.
Yeah.
Who died young a few years ago.
Yep.
He was a bullpenner right before me. I was, so he was a bullpenner in the late 80s. And, but I knew him because he'd still come by. He was looking for work, you know, inking work or whatever. And so I knew him from being around the bull. You know, he'd come up to the bullpen looking for work, this and that. You know, we talk. And then he disappeared for a few years. And he came back mid-90s as an assistant editor. I forget whose assistant editor he was. But as an assistant editor, he started picking up inking work too. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I remember talking to him in the bullpen, and he's like, I could not get inking work until I was an assistant editor. He's like, once you're in, you're friends with the editors who give out the work, then you get the work. I was like, oh, okay.
Also in the
that
90s,
just kind of confirmed what I already knew.
Yeah, because in the 90s, the funny thing is that they were printing so many books.
Yeah.
They didn't have enough artists.
No.
So almost if you delivered pizza, you might have been given a book before you left.
But not if you were in the bullpen.
But not if you were on the bullpen staff.
I remember a guy that seemed to copy poses, but didn't have a style of his own, and didn't have much storytelling. Grant Mean.
I don't remember that name.
I don't remember that name. There was so many different things going on at that time too. Because he
did the Spawn clone, Night Watch.
I remember the book. I don't remember the artist on there.
I think he also did some Ravage 2099 before Joe Bennett came along.
I don't recall the name. It might even been a pen name, because that was a lot going on there too as well with the pen names. You know, it always struck me so odd why there was not a Marvel bullpen comic book coming out, since everyone in the bullpen, there was more than enough people in the Marvel bullpen that could have handled a couple of books that could have been bullpen only comic books.
There was enough. Bunch was doing all his
movie
reviews instead of working, so what's that?
Yeah, so there was enough. There was enough time.
There was enough talent in there.
And more than enough talent. I always wondered, but then later on, I did realize that I was lucky that I was getting coloring work here and there, but it was mostly because it's Friday. Right. The editor is in a bind. He needs someone to color some pages over the weekend.
Coloring work
Maybe
you
we
could
get
get if you
color
were in the bullpen, and of course, lettering work you could get if you were in the bullpen.
Mhm.
But penciling and inking work, no.
No, and and if you stayed in the if you stayed after work long enough, you'll be inking Texiera pages.
Right.
So
There was a few things I did in the matter of fact. There was one time, you would help out. Some of the artists were there with it. It was he's died since then. Jim Sanders III. Do you remember him? You ever met him?
Jim
I
Jim Sanders
think
died?
I don't know. I don't think I met him.
he
Not that I
was.
recall.
Captain America Medusa Effect. He inked that.
He inked that. I think he was. I can't remember what book it was. It was a She-Hulk, I think.
Mhm.
It seems to be such a backward approach, not hiring from the bullpen. Maybe we would have gotten more good art without that prejudice. Yeah, and it really had to do with the work too.
Also, the Jim Shooter's policy that editors don't work on their own books may have.
No, that didn't have anything to do with it.
That was,
And
yeah,
I
Jim was
put in a
long gone,
permanent
but
policy, but that
yeah.
really didn't have it. It had to do with at any workplace, there's a hierarchy of jobs where there's, some jobs are seen as the higher jobs and some jobs are seen as the lower jobs. That's just how workplaces work. At the at Marvel at the time, this is pre-computer especially, the bullpen was seen as the lower job, and they were just. We used to the crazy thing. We used to hear all this stuff from the editors too. Danny Fingeroth was always voted first up against the wall when the revolution comes, because he just always said terrible things about the bullpen. He would tell his assistant editors, "Don't treat them nice, just treat them like a pair of hands." And of course, the assistant editors would come out and tell us this stuff.
Yeah, the assistant editors liked us, because again, it was like
they were the
they
ones
had
who
to
actually
deal with
worked with us. So we would always hear the terrible things that the editors would say about the bullpen, because the assistant editors would all tell us. And they would treat, like I said, Danny Fingeroth was always the worst. Post Marvel, I've seen Danny, and he's perfectly fine, perfectly nice. While we were working at Marvel, he was just a terrible human being to the bullpenners. And you're just like, what the hell is wrong with you? Get out of here.
And so it was like, and again, it was one of those things where it's like you got once you had whatever position you had, especially bullpen.
Right.
I was in art returns, but I was still part of the bullpen. They saw you as that job, and that's all you
Right.
ever was. And I got lucky to get the freelance work that I did get. But again, as you mentioned, it was coloring. I was inking.
Right.
Occasionally helping people out to meet a deadline. So 3 pages here, whatever. And I would occasionally get hired to do 1 or 2 pages, something like that. But it was always Friday, 5 o'clock. No one's around. They're against the wall. We need someone to do some pages over the weekend. So that's how I got a lot of my freelance work.
You are what you could do for them.
Exactly. And you were only as good as your previous book, and you were never the only time I ever got like full books is because I would, have to put the cape on for that weekend, rush something for them. And then it was like, oh, here's the next, you could have this whole issue of Wolverine because you helped us out. And then that's why I was able to do like Wolverine 147 was because Wolverine 146, I helped catch up the book. I had a copy of it around here. So I was able to help the book catch up because I happened to be around. But I never really got a full series from it, although I did try. The worst thing an editor ever told me was I just got my art returns back from myself on the Wolverine book. And I happened to be in one of the other X-Men's office. And he's like, what are those? Oh, these are my color guides that I did on Wolverine. And he's flipping through the pages. And he's like, these are really good. You should be on a monthly title. And it's like, so here's an editor telling me I should be on a monthly book. I cannot make that decision.
Yeah.
Decision. And I said, I agree. I should be on a monthly book. what book would you like to give me? And he's like, I don't have a book to give you. So why tell me that? Why say I'm good enough to be on a monthly book and not hire me to be on a monthly
And
book?
Sleepy says, would you have been better off working as an assistant to an artist in a studio? Probably. I've seen that work out more than I've saw bullpenners work out. Like Jimmy Palmiotti is the best example of it because he was Tex's assistant. That's how he got. But Jimmy Palmiotti was the best schmoozer I ever saw at Marvel.
Yes.
So he turned being Jimmy Tex's assistant into a career, but it was really his like he was just the best schmoozer I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Nice guy, like a nice guy too. That's not a criticism that he's the
No,
best.
not at all. It was that he's a people person. He was able to talk to people.
Yeah,
and that worked definitely for him. You know, when a lot of stories that I get told, like when people broke into comics, everyone got in a different way. You know, Joe Madureira happened to be the only guy to ever be an intern.
Oh yeah, I got to see that firsthand.
Yeah,
I still don't know what that was.
Story, and that only happened that one time.
Only happened that one time. Like I saw a lot of talent go through that bullpen in my Marvel years. Joe Madureira was a 16-year-old high school intern who was pretty talented.
Yeah.
And Bob Harris took an interest in him.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never seen that before. Never saw it again.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. You know, there have been interns that eventually did go on.
Yeah.
To become, comic book artists in their own.
There are bullpenners who eventually, like, who came out? Sergio Carello was a bullpenner. He had to go to DC to get work. Paul Azaceta was a bullpenner. Once again, he had to go to DC and the Indies to get work at first.
Yeah,
there's a couple others I can't think, but those are two of them. But most didn't.
Yeah, most did not. You know, some of them had to go somewhere else to do art and then come back because you kind of like you had to let Marvel forget what you were doing there. To come back, and now you're something else. You know, when I left Marvel, I was still getting some coloring work. So, you know, the reprint department kept me busy for a while when I first left Marvel, but I was doing more work for DC as a letterer. Because they knew me as a letterer because of the work that I was doing for manga. You know, I was able to getting that work from Mike Lackey was the first was the first editor who left Marvel, and then to hire me in the next company he went to, which was Central Park Media. And since Marvel did not do manga, I thought to myself, well, I could work for this company while I was working for Marvel. So at Marvel, I'll be working during the day on Marvel books. And then in the evening at night, when I went home, I would be working on manga because I was lettering and I wasn't lettering for Marvel. So to me, in my mind, that wasn't a conflict of interest. And it was like, that was the way I was able to get work was, you know, basically following editors after they left Marvel.
Because you work for editors, not companies.
Right, exactly. And
but if the editorial culture is that bullpenners are useless to me, then you're in trouble. What did 62 Lefty Blues say before Sleepy Reader here? I don't think we ever read that one.
Okay, so
the second to last comment.
Is this one?
When I was growing up, if you told someone you drew or did art, they would always say, "Oh, can you do me a sign?"
Yeah.
Thank God they had quick print shops they do now. Okay, that's interesting.
I still get weird questions of people like, "Oh, you're an artist. Can you do me a portrait?" That's not the art that I do. You know, I don't paint.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Here is the first Marvel team up starring Spider-Man I ever bought. This is, what is this, number 40? 40, number 40. Spider-Man and the Sons of Time. This isn't where I started buying it consistently, but it's the first one I remember buying.
That early John Byrne?
No. This is Sal Buscema, is it?
Sal, okay.
Is it written by Bill Mantlo?
Yes.
Of course. It's the Sons of the Tiger. Bill Mantlo was kind of proprietary of the characters he worked on, right?
Yeah, okay, let's see. Bill Mantlo, writer, Sal Buscema, and Mike Esposito. This is actually the beginning of, to me, a classic run on Marvel. It actually started with issue 39, maybe. I got some of them because the first issue that I started buying regularly was this terrific. I still love this John Romita cover a lot. This Marvel team
cover,
up.
yeah.
Once again, I think the same team. Bill Mantlo, Sal Buscema, Mike Esposito. It ends with the trial of the Wraith story. And I think it starts with about issue 39 and ends with issue, I think, 53. And it's just, to me, like a classic example of the team-up concept, where each issue was kind of individual, but built up over time into a final story.
Right.
And it was like, and there was even time travel in the middle of it. So he could team up with people from the past. And it's the introduction of Gene DeWolf.
Oh, okay.
But this was when I first started buying Marvel Team Up right here, was with this issue, 48. Still love that.
With Iron Man.
Where he had radio-controlled bomb planes coming at him. So there's some more of my Spider-Man history. And this is the original copy. You can see how dirty the back is.
Uh-huh.
And somewhere along the line, I got all the issues in between.
Mm-hmm. That was one of those things with the funny thing with looking at the comics and the copies and stuff like that. In my mind, every now and then I would go back and like pick up an old issue and reread an old issue and be surprised of the condition of the book. Because in my mind, I bought that book, I read it, I bagged and boarded it. It must still be in mint condition. And I realized, no, it is completely not. I realized I read that book from cover to cover multiple times. Sometimes I'll take a whole year's worth of books out and read through that year and then just put them back and not realize how much wear and tear I had put on those early books. But in my mind, no, they got to be in mint condition because I remember buying them in mint condition.
Like this one right here is one sometime in the early 2000s. This is not actually my original copy. My original copy is actually on the shelf. I have a section called my first copies. And I went back, and as many as I could remember, I bought from Mile High Comics when they first went online, mint condition copies of this, my first Spider-Man, I remember. Just because I remember them in mint condition. I don't remember them how they are on my shelf now, all battered and torn up because I read them so many times as a kid. So if I want to look at my original stuff in mint condition, I go to that section.
And there have been plenty of times where I'll buy a book that I already own because it's just easier to buy it than it is to dig down. I've done that many a times. Or sometimes I would just be... Again, at the time at Marvel, they used to do bins of books.
I did bring them both out. There's the mint condition one, and there's my original
one.
Yeah, you can't tell over the screen, but the white is all dirty around the logo here. It's not a terrible. There's of course endless spine ticks, and the back is the white is all dirty.
How do I?
Because this was my copy from 1976.
How do I make you bigger so we can get?
There's a big smear on the staple.
Okay.
But I want to see it how I remember it. This is the one.
There we go. We'll solo layout you. We can see how they look.
The actual original one I bought in 1976 and the one I bought in 2004 to be the mint condition version. And I have ones in a lot worse condition. My Hulk 200 is just a wreck.
The book that I have in the worst condition is X-Men number 3.
Paolo is in daylight in a shock.
Yeah.
I have an
X-Men
issue
number 3.
X-Men number 3, the first appearance of the Blob. I dare not take it out of the bag and board it's in.
Oh yeah.
It is so fragile. I mean, that's the way I got it because it was
right.
My super of the building that I lived in my first apartment building. I was friends with the super, and he had a box of just comic books. So I ended up getting X-Men number 3 from him, just because that was the only book that was like, oh, this could be worth something, but it's in terrible condition, completely falling apart. And it's like I never really actually read that particular issue. I read reprints of it, of course, but it was like for a long time it was the oldest comic book I owned. But again, I can't open it. I can't enjoy it. It's just falling completely apart.
Right.
I mean, I haven't looked at it in a while. It might just be dust at this point.
I have a few comics like that.
Yeah, where it was like
that I got that way.
Yeah. And it was like, but it was just cool to be able to say, oh, I have this.
Yeah.
And it's not for value. It's more of this like, here's something unique from an age before I was born.
Right.
From, is it an important issue? First appearance of the Blob. How important can that really be? But it was more like, again, it's more of like the novelty of having something like that. And when I got it, to me, it was like having a golden age book. It really wasn't. It's silver age, but again, it was just the novelty of having this extremely old book. At the time, was my oldest comic book. But it's like, yeah, can't enjoy it, can't open it up. It just completely fall apart.
Here, it's 5 p.m. over here. The sun's going down. It's an angle. The light comes in low. Here is another significant Spider-Man comic from my youth, if only to demonstrate how goofy Spider-Man was at the time. And this is one of my favorite. This is probably my favorite goofy Spider-Man plot.
It is my favorite Spider-Man cover.
Terrific cover.
Who for did this years. Cover? Gil Kane, inked by John Romita Sr.
Okay, terrific cover. And this one was a back issue to me at the time. I probably got this one around the time I got, Spider-Man 157 or something. But like this was a back issue.
We all went solo, so we can see that cover again.
I got to show you that there's the cover. Terrific cover. But the plot is crazy in that the whole plot is the Shocker blacking out the city, parts of the city, so he can spell his name in lights.
It's all about the branding. Supervillains need to do the branding.
I mean, I just remember being a kid going, what? That's just like, that's nuts. Just on used to the late night version of Paolo. That's what it is.
And it's funny because when we got online, Pablo, this morning, it's like I didn't realize how much light came from this window because I had the shade open. It's like I gotta bring that shade down so people can see me.
But that's just like the craziest plot. That's how silly Spider-Man was during this era. It's like, and that's why I was like, I bought Spider-Man. I thought it was an okay, average book, but there was a lot of silliness in it.
My kind of silliness. But that for a long time has been my favorite Spider-Man cover.
Great cover. Just a silly plot.
Completely silly. And it's funny because I have always known that John Romita Sr. worked on it. I didn't know he inked it. I actually thought he drew the whole thing. And it wasn't until later I discovered it. Oh, that's a Gil Kane cover.
Mm-hmm. Not a bad rat. Gil Kane draws the worst dogs. You ever see a dog on a Gil Kane cover? You're like, what kind of animal is that?
Yeah.
The rat. Everything on that cover is just so well done.
Do you think John Romita did most of the plotting on Spider-Man? I have read he had. And I don't think he was particularly good at it. He has said he wasn't particularly good at it.
I think that he disliked having to.
Yes.
Right, because that wasn't what he was hired for. So I don't think he was happy with it. Because I know I've read accounts of him saying that, and his son also mentioned it, that John Sr. stressed every line he put on the paper. That he was kind of like overthinking it, or he stressed.
Well, that's his drawing. We're talking about his plotting too.
Right.
Yeah,
so, I wonder if that added to the stress.
He was one of those artists who didn't think he was as good as his heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And but they had there's a lot of
Well, he said when he came back. Yeah, we said when he came back to Marvel in the '60s that he only wanted to do inking.
Yeah.
But then Kirby couldn't draw everything, so, and then Ditko quit. So there it goes.
Right.
Yeah. And he came back to Marvel before John Buscema. So,
but I have read he did do the plotting of the books, and I don't think. I think here's the Ditko issues. The biggest evidence to me that Ditko was behind most of the creation of Spider-Man is how little creation there was after him. I mean, who came out of the John Romita era?
The gangster characters.
What was that?
The gangster characters.
Right. The Kingpin.
Right.
The Kangaroo.
The Rhino.
Prowler.
The Rhino. Rhino's okay. He was early on. But there wasn't a lot of creation going on during that time. And if Stan Lee really was the creative powerhouse that he says he was, there would have been a lot of creation going on.
Yeah.
But there just wasn't. And I think Spider-Man is the biggest evidence of that. Because it's like, who were all the Ditko villains? The Vulture, Doc Ock, the Green Goblin, all the big Spider-Man villains were Ditko villains.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Who's the next big Spider-Man villain? Venom?
Mm-hmm.
That's really strange.
Hobgoblin, and that's a take on the Green Goblin.
Yeah, that's just a take on the Green Goblin.
Exactly.
Hammerhead. There we go.
Again,
another gangster villain.
Another gangster villain. So I think the Romita years were the gangster years. Yeah. I think John probably had a love of the gangster movies.
Right.
And Dick Tracy.
Yeah.
Hammerhead is really right out of Dick Tracy.
That flat top.
Yeah. So I could see that, I don't think there was many breakaway villains during the John senior years. Kingpin is probably the most breakaway, and he was using that. Wasn't Kingpin also in Daredevil? And John was drawing Daredevil for a while.
No, I would say Kingpin didn't become a major villain, despite the fact that he appeared in Spider-Man quite a bit until Frank Miller.
Okay. You recall that the Kingpin appeared on a Captain America storyline in Las Vegas, where he was the head of Hydra. And that story was drawn by Romita.
Okay.
Man-Wolf. Yeah, they're all middling at best.
Yeah, exactly.
And was Man-Wolf? No, Ditko created the Sun, but Man-Wolf.
The Sun, but Man-Wolf came in later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a Prowler.
The Prowler. There was another Romita one.
Romita.
Once again.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, John is known for drawing the Goblin, those Goblin stories because, it was a strong character left over.
Nothing against his artistic skills. I just don't think he was a powerhouse creator in terms of characters, and neither was Stan Lee. Because if Stan Lee was a powerhouse creator of characters, that would have continued under the John Romita era, and it just didn't.
Right.
But I think Stan Lee improved as a not so much as a storyteller, but on creating human personalities during Spider-Man, and John Romita may have helped with that. Because
I think John Romita added a lot of the romance genre to Spider-Man.
Yeah,
that's why a lot of people love the Romita era.
Romita is good at drawing real life scenes, and that may have helped Stan improve on making the dialogues more believable.
He was
using a lot of Kirby.
I don't know if he improved on it or it was John Romita.
The dialogues.
Yeah, I know, but Kirby often suggested dialogue in the panels that Stan Romita used. I don't know. I mean, that Stan Lee used. I don't know if Romita did that too. And my biggest evidence to Stan Lee wasn't writing, like even the dialogue. sometimes he would take Kirby's dialogue that he put in the margins. Is the Tales of Suspense from when Kirby and Lee were doing Captain America, and I think it was Gene Colan and Lee were doing Iron Man. Maybe the 80s, late 90s of Tales of Suspense. Completely different. I remember the first time I read those issues, I think I was in college. But two completely different writers. There's no way the same writer wrote that stuff.
Right.
Because they're so completely different styles. Neither of them really. Stan Lee, I think, had more to do with the Gene Colan one than he had to do with the Jack Kirby one. But it's like just reading that split book with the same writer credited on each one and reading it going, no, these are not the same writer. Perhaps Romita refined the soap opera aspect. Yeah, I think that you hit it on the head. That's what I was trying to say. I think Romita refined the soap opera aspect, and he may have written some of the dialogue too in refining that aspect that Stan Lee either took or didn't take. I don't know.
Right. I have a sinking feeling that Romita wrote most of the dialogue, and Stan would come in and put a daddy-o and a whatever was the slang at the time. Because every once in a while, Pete, MJ, and Gwen would be hanging out, and all of a sudden, a very, very 60s lingo would pop up that kind of seemed out of place. Where it's like, all right, I guess that might be some of Stan's contributing. I'm
looking here at the list of stuff that Romita created the design for. So we have Rhino, we have Shocker, and after that, nothing. They introduced the new Vulture, the Blackie Drago. Then they have there's what the hell is
Silvermane one of John's?
Silvermane?
I think so.
Yeah.
Again, gangster year.
It may have been, although Silvermane's first story was drawn by John Buscema, but it's in between. It's a fill-in. So if Romita drew the cover, it's probably his.
And then design-wise, John was the first one to draw Wolverine.
Yeah.
So he was still creating stuff.
Oh yeah.
Obviously outside.
Punisher. He
Punisher.
Designed his costume design is fine.
Yeah.
So here we have some more characters: Vanessa Fisk, Man Mountain Marco, Prowler, Chameleon, Schemer. The Black Widow's new costume debuted on Amazing Spider-Man number 86. That's a redesign.
He's a costume designer.
Yeah, definitely a good costume.
Did he do Medusa?
I think so.
No, Medusa's Kirby.
But I think she got like a new design because she appeared in the Spider-Man books, and I think she had like the Frightful Four new design. Like he's
right, but the thing about Medusa is that her design is her costume is her hair. It's like it doesn't matter if Doc Ock is wearing his green and the orange suit, or if he's wearing a lab coat, or if he's wearing a business suit. You know it because it's the arms, and Medusa doesn't need a costume. She's not like Black Bolt, as long as she's recognizable because of her hair.
Right.
Sleepy Reader's comment here. Reading Roy Thomas's reminiscences about Conan, it constantly slips out that things were Smith's idea, but it's always I let him make that decision. LOL. Yeah. I only found out recently that Smith was not too happy with Roy Thomas and is taking credit for stuff.
Man Wolf may have been who did the cover on 124 because Man Wolf
or was Gil Kane Man Wolf?
Because Gil Kane is Man Wolf. The story is drawn by Gil Kane, and Kane was the regular artist.
Mm-hmm.
Either him, he was, for a while. Then Ross Andrew became. Ross Andrew. The covers are usually the characters are designed by because we have the Jekyll and the Punisher. But a lot of this, they're okay. There's Morbius, the Tarantula, but
not a lot of good creations came out of the Romita era. Not unlike Ditko.
Right.
Which leads me to believe that Stan wasn't the font of creations that he likes to tell everybody he was.
Look, ultimately, you see that in 1960, because what was Stan Lee writing? With the credits that we have of Stan Lee writing, it was Millie the Model and Patsy Walker.
But that was before he decided to do things his way. And his way was let Kirby and Ditko come up with stuff. Turns out. Not a bad way.
Not at all. If you could get that kind of work, get paid for the writer and art director, because no one else can do it.
Yeah. But the Romita era sold better. Yeah, I'm not saying the Romita era was better or worse. So for me, it was I liked the Ditko era best. But I'm just saying there wasn't a lot of creation going on during the Romita era. Like I said, the romance aspect was refined. There was good. There was stuff going on. It just wasn't the fountain of new characters.
Mm-hmm. It was also the Spidey Buggy. That changed the comic industry as we know it.
That man. Did Romita design the car? I think it was Jerry Conway's idea.
It might have been Jerry Conway.
That was a toy tie-in.
It was a toy tie-in, and it was.
So that may have been designed at the toy company.
That's possible, yeah.
That was another goofy thing that happened in this era. Though I think the original Spider Buggy was like a couple years before this. They brought it back during and destroyed it during my run afterward, in like the 170s or something. They brought the Spider Buggy back.
Yeah, from what I understand, an advertising company approached Marvel.
Yeah.
To do this car, and
so you can't even credit the Spider Buggy to.
No, not at all.
The Marvel person.
It was this company, and it's like, and it wasn't even the buggy that they would eventually use for like.
Yes. Sleepy Reader says Spider Buggy was the Ross Andru era, but I think it was also too. Like in my era was the Ross Andru era, but I came in midway through it, and I read some Spider Buggy stories that were, I think, past issue 157, but I think it actually premiered a couple of years before this. It was in one issue, I don't know, in the 130s or something, which I don't have, I don't think. But then they brought it back just to wreck it in like the 160s or something. Both Ross, on either end of the Ross Andru era, it may have been.
Right. So it was like a promotional kind of thing, because it wasn't the same buggy that was sold for Mego.
No, it was like an Aurora one or something.
Something like that, yes. And I don't know if they ever actually made that toy.
Yeah, I don't. They may not have. I don't remember.
They may not. I mean, it's only recently that they have a comic book accurate Spidey Buggy. So Hot Wheels has produced one. Hot Wheels produced two. The regular one, a deluxe one, and then like a super deluxe one that has a little mini Spider-Man in it. And then there's a Spidey Buggy and Miles Morales 2-pack, where you could put, because that Miles Morales is a 5-inch action figure, but a regular Marvel Legends Spider-Man can fit into that Spidey Buggy. I got to finish making mine because you have to kind of build it together. It's a snap together, but I want to add some webbing and stuff like that to it.
I'll be back in a few minutes.
Looking back, do you think that Spectacular was more interesting to read in some aspects than Amazing?
I've always treated, as a kid, I always treated Spectacular Spider-Man as the other Spider-Man book. So Amazing was the main book where I started on. I eventually got all the books that came out. My favorite would have been Web of Spider-Man, only because it was my chance to have Spider-Man #1, to have a issue #1. So for me, it's like I have a love of that book because that was the first issue, a #1 Spider-Man book that I was able to buy that did not exist before me collecting. So in my head, it was like Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, Marvel Tales, of course, because that got me really into the older stuff. And I didn't appreciate Ditko at the time. Did not. It wasn't what I was used to. I tend to fall in love with the first incarnation of something that I was reading, and which is funny because Ron Frenz was drawing in a Ditko style when I started reading comics. I started Amazing Spider-Man just about 252, when he had the black and white costume. That's where I kind of started. My first issue I remember clearly buying off the rack is Spider-Man's already in the black costume and he's fighting the Puma. So that was like the first Amazing Spider-Man book I was reading. But the first Spider-Man comic book was Marvel Team Up. Team Up with Moon Knight and Team Up with Iron Man. I think it's 141 and 142, somewhere in that line. I don't recall the numbers clearly. But that was my introduction into Spider-Man, with those books. So then I was picking up Peter Parker Spider-Man. I did enjoy them. I just, again, in my mind, I was like, that was the #2 book, but I probably enjoyed those Spider-Man stories more. I really have to take them out and look at them again just to see what stories were going on, because I was a little annoyed with the Black Cat aspects of those books for Peter Parker Spider-Man. I was annoyed, I think, with the character of the Black Cat. Like, I felt that she was not right for Peter. Again, coming down to the storytelling aspect of the soap opera. So for me, it was like, he should have been with MJ. Black Cat, I don't think was the right woman for Peter.
Right. Because when I started, the Brazilians, there really was not that much of a difference to me. It was later that I found out that Amazing was the book for the Peter's human aspects. Spectacular was the more adventurous book. And then there was Marvel Team Up, which grounded Peter in the Marvel universe. So there were a lot of Marvel team ups those were the stories I enjoyed the most. Those stories that they had come out in the US in 1980, around that time. So Peter had broken up with MJ, so the Black Cat started hanging around Spider-Man. She was infatuated with him, but when it comes to actual girlfriends, there was April from the Daily Globe and the guy with the girl with the glasses.
Liz Allen?
No. In the 80s, in college. Becky.
I completely forgot about her.
Yeah, Becky something.
I don't even remember her name.
And the other girl, Marcy Kane, she was later revealed to be an alien. So there was a lot of choice for Peter at the time. So I was not in love with the concept of Mary Jane being the one.
Right.
So it seemed to, since I was more into this at the age of 6 to 8, I was more in love with the superheroics. Since Black Cat went on adventures with Spider-Man, I thought it appropriate that that Black Cat was Spider-Man's girlfriend.
Yeah, for me, it's like I never liked Felicia for that aspect. I don't. She was a great sidekick for Spider-Man and running around and stuff like that. But for me, it was like, I think what it was for me is I did not like the idea that she was in love with Spider-Man and not Peter, and and that irked me. And again, that irked my 13-year-old mind. And it's like, that's not what I liked. And for me, I didn't have like the Gwen years, so Gwen was already long gone. So so MJ was there. But again, to me, it was like one of those things where, since I read all those books, I can't agree with you. Yes, that Amazing was about Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man was about Spider-Man, that kind of adventure. And then Web of Spider-Man, for me, felt like that is something interesting. And Charles Vest's cover, Jared, I was saying that the reason why I love Web of Spider-Man is because that was my ability to buy a #1 issue of Spider-Man, the first issue of Spider-Man.
My first #1 issue, which I don't have anymore. Matter of fact, I didn't even bother with the facsimile. This is one of the significant what ifs from my child. My this is Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. What is that? 58. This is the one John Byrne issue, and this is supposed to be John Byrne taking over Spectacular Spider-Man. And you're
the art inside is good, but that cover is so boring.
1981. He was supposed to be doing a run on Spectacular Spider-Man, but he only did this one issue. And he was supposed to be bringing it back to the glory of the Ditko years. And he did some nice artwork for it, too.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very Ditko images. Even that cover.
And you also have to understand that, I bought Spectacular Spider-Man #1 off of the stands. That was, I think, what did they come out? 77?
76.
So that was right in my wheelhouse era. And though I was already buying Amazing Spider-Man, which, as I said, Amazing Spider-Man was a middle of the road comic to begin with. Amazing,
right?
Spectacular was its boring cousin. Not a go. Thanks, phone. Ross was there a long time. Yeah, the beginning and end of the Spider Buggy era. But so it was like almost everybody I knew bought Spectacular Spider-Man reluctantly, because it really was not a very good. I mean, Amazing Spider-Man wasn't that good a comic at the time, but you'd take Amazing over Spectacular any day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And it went on that way for years, where like Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, was the boring version of Spider-Man that you read just because it was Spider-Man. And it wasn't one of Marvel's better selling books because it was Spider-Man, but it was not very good ever. I mean, it was, at best, it was mediocre. But this one issue was really good. And I remember other people being like, ooh, maybe it'll finally be good now. But then, of course, the next issue, he was gone.
And I really like John Byrne's Spider-Man in that era. Every time you got a John Byrne Spider-Man book, it was like a treat. And you would only see him once in a while, like the, was it Team Up? That he was in the swamp? And that was I always like, I want John Byrne to draw Spider-Man. I wanted John Byrne to draw Spider-Man for so long. By the time he drew Spider-Man, I was so disappointed in the John Byrne Spider-Man. It was like, he missed that. I think he missed the time to have a run, as big as his X-Men run, as big as his Fantastic Four run. They should have been a Spider-Man run at that time period.
This was supposed to be it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember a team up that Byrne drew with the Living Monolith, and he teams up with Havoc in one issue and Thor in the next, and that's when I figured out John Byrne can't draw Thor properly. I mean, it's all there, but you're expecting Thor to be an imposing figure, and he looks just like a tall guy.
I have not read this in a long time, but I remember he actually turned the Ringer into an interesting villain, which is a guy who shoots rings that constrict.
Right.
I mean, but he made him interesting.
Mm-hmm. There was a language there, and as you mentioned, there's a Steve Ditko-ish aspect to that issue. Yeah. And again, it was one of those things. It's like, I would really have enjoyed.
Right. Because I don't know. It may have been in the bullpen bulletins or something, but I remember there was hype for this issue beforehand, saying John Byrne bringing it back to the glory days of Ditko, sort of thing.
Right.
But then, poof. One issue and done. I don't know what the story behind it was. Probably had something to do with Jim Shooter chasing him away, but who knows?
Let's see. He had been. Was that when he came back to the Fantastic Four? Right after that.
Yeah, I think he did FF after this one. This is
because in FF they let him here. In Fantastic Four they let him write.
81.
Yeah, so Fantastic Four, he starts Fantastic Four very close to that, I think, because in Fantastic Four they let him write, which is what they couldn't in X-Men because of Claremont, even though Byrne with the plotting was coming up with all the ideas.
Roger Stern was writing this one. Oh, this was during the Roger Stern Byrne era of Captain America too, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right around then. Which was another one that was cut short, but was good.
Here's another reason why I like Deborah Whitman and Marcy Kane as girlfriends, even if they were not the one, because it was during Roger Stern's run.
Okay.
All right.
And well, I loved Roger Stern, and when he started the Avengers, and that's when I was already reading Marvel comics, but that's when I got into comics. I was 8, 9, and it started on the Avengers, and that was it. So I already knew him from Spider-Man. I never read his Hulk run because they started with the Mantlo stuff with the Brazilian comics, but I knew that Stern was a great writer just from those ones.
And notice all these books are from my childhood, and I probably stopped reading Spider-Man regularly 1984. I'd guess 1985, somewhere around there.
Right, that's about the time Secret Wars happened. And
Right.
Remember you saying that was about the time you dropped Marvel and DC.
Right. I stopped with almost all.
I don't know if I know what you were reading from DC at that time period.
I was probably reading the Teen Titans. I read some Batman. I started with the Byrne Superman, but jumped off pretty quickly. Atari Force was a good comic. Jose Garcia Lopez art. Amethyst Princess of Gemworld was pretty good with Ernie Colon art. I stuck with Iraq Son of Thunder for longer than I should have. That was about 20 issues. And it was I just wanted it to be good because it had so many things in it, but it was so boring. It was so boring. What else was I buying from DC? Green Lantern, I think I bought for a while. I read the whole Trial of the Flash. Not because it was good, but because it was kind of a train wreck, and I couldn't believe how long they were stretching it out. And it had who was the backup story? Dr. Fate. That a backup story. I forget who was drawing it. Of Dr. Fate that was pretty good that I enjoyed. So I stuck with the Trial. I think that's what got me to buy the Flash in the first place. And I kind of liked the Carmen Infantino art, even though I always hated Carmen Infantino art from the late 70s, early 80s at Marvel. I kind of liked it on the Trial of the Flash, but not really. It turns out, we found out later that the reason the Trial of the Flash was going on so long is because they had made the decision to kill the Flash in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Except Crisis on Infinite Earths wasn't starting for another 2 years. So they just kept doing this Trial of the Flash story. That went on and on. And now those issues are actually worth something. I don't have them anymore. That's one of the reasons they're worth something, is because no one was buying it.
Right.
And those of us who did buy it got rid of the issues because they were not very good. That's some of the stuff I was buying from DC in the early 80s.
Okay. So none of the stuff you mentioned, I wasn't reading yet because I didn't start until afterwards.
Right.
You know, after because I got everything Marvel, then it was like, all right, I guess I'll start reading some DC books. I needed more.
Yeah. I didn't start reading DC till Teen Titans #1 in 1980, I think it was. That's when I started reading. That's the first time I'd read DC regularly.
Right. I was reading it during Crisis. So I started picking up Superman. They were a bunch of relaunches. So I started picking them up from #1. So for me, Wally West was my Flash.
Yeah.
Even though I knew Barry, I only knew Barry from the cartoons. And then I enjoyed reading Crisis for the fact of how many characters were there that I knew nothing about. even in the multiverse, and it's like, wow, they're killing characters left and right. So it's like I couldn't even learn about them because they were gone from the issue. And so from that, relaunching the whole DC universe is where I started with my collection and reading that stuff, and I was enjoying it because it was so brand new. And again, yes, both Marvel and DC were doing these crossover gimmicks, but it worked. It dragged me in, and I was just reading it all. And then, I would go back, pick up books, some of the older stuff. Titans were great, Teen Titans, and then just reading that kind of stuff. I don't know if there was probably a title that I followed clearly. I found it was interesting to eventually do storylines through all the Superman titles. So you got a new Superman story every week. I thought that was an interesting thing to do. Marvel tried it a couple of times. It didn't work, and they tried it with Spider-Man. But they ended up doing like mini series with that, where it would go through all through the books. But that didn't last too long. And I think the jarring thing about that is because there were various artists between books when they did it that way. But again, it was like it was fun starting off that way, and then I didn't really discover the independent stuff until a lot later. And for me, independents were anything that wasn't Marvel and DC. So Dark Horse, I kind of put into that, into it. And then, but the problem was every time I discovered a independent title, it didn't last that long.
Right.
So I would pick up something, and like we mentioned yesterday, Warp. I know I picked up an issue of Warp. And I don't think I ever found it again because I don't remember where I would have gotten it from. Because again, I didn't discover a comic book shop until I was way into high school. So the first shop that I went to would have been Jim Hanley's. No, Forbidden Planet was the first comic book shop I ever went into, and I was already in high school by then. So before that, was always still buying it in the 4 or 5 main stores in my area that I was able to walk to. And if you missed an issue, you kind of missed an issue.
Yeah.
And X-Men was notorious from going from 60 cents to going to $3 to try to buy it in the back issue at a comic book shop. And it's so I had to make sure I found the X-Men books.
The next time I read Spider-Man with any regularity, do you remember these Marvel Premiere editions? This is Spider-Man Brand New Day, speaking of Mary Jane. And it's a small 5-issue hardcover. Came out in 2008. And this was the period in the late aughts where there just were no monthly comics for me to buy. So I started buying collected editions of things. Mostly old stuff. But I was also looking for new stuff to read too. So I said, and this is 5 issues. It's $20 plus whatever discount I got. I think I got these at my comic shop, 10% discount or whatever, which wasn't that expensive. And I think these used to be limited edition too, meaning the first printing was the Premiere edition. Sometimes they even had only 2,000 copies printed on back. But they don't have that for this Spider-Man one.
I wasn't aware of that because by 2008, that's 4 years after I left Marvel.
Okay.
I was still buying comics in the comic book shop, but that was also around the time I think the shop may have closed and I stopped buying comics. So those trades I didn't get at the time. I knew of them. I was aware of them, but I kind of was I was a bit cynical because, gone from Marvel for 4 years and they haven't called me back yet.
Yeah.
And so I was a little peeved, and I did not like the concept of making stories for trades.
Right.
I was okay that you would take your stories and make a trade paperback out of it. I didn't like they were kind of restricting the writers to make sure it could be made into a trade paperback.
That was one of the reasons I decided to try it this way. I was like, well, if they're going to write them like that, I may as well give them a try like that. And this was Brand New Day, which pissed off a lot of Spider-Man fans.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, may as well try it out. I have no emotional investment in Mary Jane. She means nothing to me.
Mhm.
My era wasn't really my era. Peter Parker had girlfriends left and right. He didn't really have one steady one. Sometimes it was Mary Jane. Sometimes it was Black Cat. Sometimes it was a Glenn clone of Gwen Stacy. So
And I was going to say,
so
if I
I
remember
ended-
correctly,
what was
that, if I remember correctly, Brand New Day was also one of those storylines where it wasn't coming out on time as the individual books. And I don't know if Joe Quesada was writing them or he was just doing the covers. There was
it's
something
Dan Slott's doing the writing on this.
with Dan Sutton. There was something, one of the runs that was part of or that was connected to Brand New Day was, I think, delayed. Because I know I was joking around calling, no, I haven't read Spider-Man Brand New Delay because the issues haven't been coming out. I think Joe might have done some of the covers. And I think I stood away from it because I didn't like the idea of breaking up Spider-Man Mary Jane for story.
I didn't care about that at all, so it was a good starting point for me.
Okay.
For me, this Spider-Man without Mary Jane was my Spider-Man, so I may as well give it. If I was going to give it a read anytime, I may as well give it a read then.
Right.
And I ended up buying 4 in a row of these. This has got 5 issues in it.
Mhm.
And I ended up buying 4. I guess it came out every 5 or 6 months, but I think I stopped buying it because it was. I don't even remember them now.
Right.
So I can't even tell you if they were good or bad. But I bought 4 of them, so I must have liked it okay enough. But I think I stopped buying it when they combined all the Spider-Man comics. Because at one point, I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to check my other ones. But at one point around this time, they made Spider-Man a weekly comic in that you would read Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't even remember what the other 2 Spider-Man books were.
Right.
But the story would go between all 4 monthly books, hence making it a weekly comic. And so the writers all had to get together and figure that all out. And I think that's when I stopped buying it because I was like, I don't need that many little, because all of a sudden it went from being once every 6 months to being once every 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I'm out. I don't like them that much. Then the funny thing was, I tried to sell these over the years many times. It's like nobody wants them.
No.
Huh. I put like all 4 issues up for like $20 on eBay. Nobody wanted them. All 4 hardcovers. It's like nobody wanted them. I was like, all right, they'll just sit on my shelf. Oh well.
Yeah. And it's funny because you just never know when something is going to sell or be hot or anything like that. You know, it's interesting now watching so many Bronze Age books all of a sudden are worth
terrible Bronze Age books.
Yeah.
She-Hulk #1, Ms. Marvel #1. Terrible books. Mediocrity at its height. I had them all, bought them all during the time. We knew they were mediocre then. But now they're first appearances.
Their first appearances, their key books and all
Nova.
that stuff. And it's like, you know, and even now, you know, books that were mediocre books when I started are creeping up in numbers.
Yeah.
It's like I would see something, it's like, really? That book is worth that much? I remember when I first tried to sell it, and I practically got laughed at. So I've been far away enough from it.
For decades, you couldn't give away Ms. Marvel. You couldn't give away She-Hulk. You couldn't give away Nova. But then, heck, for a long time, you couldn't give away Star Wars #1.
Yeah.
No one wanted it.
No, they just sat there for, you know, always run into them in the quarter boxes and stuff like that. And it's like, now you see a price, it's like, wait, how can that be even worth that? There's just nothing happened in that book. And it's wild. But, you know, comics are that way.
Yeah.
In some cases, it gets weird. When we were talking about the Mars book last night, I found the whole collection.
Okay.
That I can get off of Macari was actually cheaper than on eBay. I even found someone selling the retail poster. I might pick that up too, just to bundle that all together. The original retail poster for $14. And it's like, that's a novelty. I could get the whole collection and the retail poster in one shot.
Why not?
Because, why not? And probably in a couple of weeks, because we talked about it, it's probably going to jump up in value. It's insane.
You know what I bought yesterday on a whim, since I was buying so many bicycle parts? Something I'd never heard of before this week. Waifu cards. Waifu is a Japanese word for your cartoon wife.
Mm-hmm.
They're cartoon women who you're like, I'd marry her if she was real. Right. They make up sets of trading cards of sexy Japanese women drawings. And I just happened to, I don't know how I stumbled onto it. But I was like, you know what? I got some off of Amazon. I'm going to throw those in with the bike parts. Well, that's what happens sometimes when I'm like buying necessities. Like to me, bike parts are necessities.
Right.
So I got to spend $125 on bike parts for this upcoming year. It is just, I like to have them in reserve because my tires are going to wear out. That's going to happen.
Right.
My brake cables are going to wear out. That's good. So I have to have the parts sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when I do, and it's like, I don't really want to spend money on it. Sometimes you don't really want to spend money on the stuff you have to spend money on. So it's like, I want to throw a little mad money at this purchase too. A little crazy things. Well, I've got some waifu cards coming. I don't know what I'm going to do with them besides throw them with the rest of the cards.
That collecting is a weird thing. Sometimes you'll see something and go, "Oh, I must have this," or something. I tend to investigate something like, "Oh, I've never heard of this thing." And go looking into it, and it's like, that's fascinating, especially with the older comic books and stuff like that. And then go, I want everything that exists in this kind of a thing, because I do like the idea of being able to collect something and go, okay, this collection is done.
Yeah.
So whether it's a series or if it's a, like sometimes they will just make 3 of something that exist.
Here's another thing I have coming today. Acrylic paint pens. And these are just for, I used to, play Magic the Gathering.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just sometimes like to draw on Magic the Gathering cards. Because you can get really yesterday I was even dabbling in writing on Magic the Gathering cards. but trying to find the best pen to work on these is not. I think paint pens that just says Blam, and you can buy like 1,000 Magic the Gathering cards for $20 on eBay. They're all the cheap common ones, which I have in the past. So I've got a box of 1,000 Magic the Gathering cards that I bought just to draw on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another. Maybe I can draw on the waifu cards too.
There you go. What are the things is like, my boxes of projects to eventually do is I bought a bunch of coverless comics. Bought a whole stack of them for I think $19, $20. Just a huge stack of various coverless comics, just so I could put Bristol board around it and just draw a cover.
Oh, okay, yes.
And then I got stuck between the concept of, do I recreate the original cover, or do I create a cover based on, how I would have created the cover? How would I put together the cover for the book? My aspect of covers has always been an image from inside of the book should be on the cover, and it should give you a hint.
Well, it should say a scene, not an image. You don't want to recreate a panel.
Right, not to recreate a panel, but recreate a scene. Because some of my favorite covers were always, I mentioned before, one of my early comic books was Amazing Spider-Man, where it's Ron Frenz drawing it, and it's Spider-Man on the cover falling from a building, and the Puma is attacking him. They're like fighting. They both fall off the building, and there's a panel in the book very similar. And I always thought that was really cool. That here's an aspect of the book that is on the cover that's compelling what's happening, and that happens in the book.
That's actually now I'm thinking about it. I did a couple of sketch covers of my own where at my comic shop once I found some cheap EC reprints. So I bought a few of them, made them into sketch covers, and then just because I found a panel inside that I liked and blew it up and did a sketch cover of that panel in sort of that artist. It was just a way of working in somebody else's style too.
Right.
So I remember finding that interesting when I did it.
That's very cool. I like that. I like that.
But I also just got a stack of comics from my LCA. He bought a collection. And of course, there was a bunch of comics he was just throwing out because they're not in good condition.
Right.
And I was like, give me those. I'm going to bring them into my school because there was a one of my students this past semester was like, do you know where to get any cheap magazines? Because another class had assigned them some collage stuff to do, so they needed cheap magazines. But there's no such thing anymore. There's barely magazines, let alone cheap magazines. But I think what she ended up doing was printouts, finding stuff she wanted and printing it out and cutting it up. So I was like, you know what? We should have a place around here where there are cheap magazines just so the students can use them for a collage. And I said, ooh, I can use those comics. So I got a stack of like random X-Men comics from the 90s that are in terrible shape. I'm like, they can collage this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because you mentioned collages. That I remember in school doing a project with collage, and it was so easy to get magazines for free.
Yeah.
Back issue magazines. Yeah. There was always a box of magazines.
Always magazines around. In the 90s, I had 20 subscriptions to magazines because they were cheap.
Yeah.
But nowadays, a magazine subscription is 40, 50, 60 bucks instead of $6.
Yeah.
I used to get magazines
because an issue is $12
and $10. What was that?
A magazine issue is like $12 nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. That's what she's like. Do you know where I can get any cheap magazines? I'm like, I don't think they exist.
Yeah, I don't think so. The last time I was in a Barnes and Nobles, I happened to walk to the magazine rack and go, all right, magazines are still in print, but they're all gun magazines and hunters magazines and fishermen and stuff like that. There's no, and the arts and craft ones are extremely expensive. And then you read it, and it's like you could also download the magazine for this amount. And it's like, oh, if I'm buying a magazine, I want the download to be free.
Yeah.
Why pay extra? And it's like, and I do miss the days of being able to buy a magazine that would give you a CD that gave you stuff, fonts, backgrounds, there was all those types of stuff. Was a lot of fun because it made it kind of interactive. And there used to be interactive magazines too, where you plug it in and it will run a program and you would get something extra for the same price of the printed magazines. And I always thought those were fun to have and get. And then eventually they even did weird things like having the balloons, having
Paolo, I can do balloons over here too for some reason, but
I can't. It doesn't happen. So I could only guess is that Jared's been on here long enough that
they gave me balloons.
That they gave him balloons. But and then eventually they started making weird CDs that were different shapes. That was wild for a while because then once they started changing how the CDs are taken in by the computer, you couldn't use those anymore because they wouldn't slide in. So I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me today to celebrate my birthday here. We're just about the 3-hour mark, and that's usually how we end the Friday shows anyway.
Yeah.
I figured, why not stick to the same kind of
Is your sister making you dinner?
She is making me what will be probably a late lunch, early dinner because we are supposed to get the snow.
Yeah.
So she's
that's
like,
right.
so she was like, you get to get here at about 2:00 before the snow. I'll make sure you have a.
Where is she?
She's only about a mile away from where I am.
Okay.
So, less than a mile,
Yeah.
a half a mile away from where I am. So
All
it's
right.
easily walkable to 17-minute walk.
All right.
And I'm not even rushing. It's just like so she's not that far away, so I could go there. She says it's going to be eggplant parmesan. She's going to make chicken parmesan for my brother, and we're just going to spend, I guess, the rest of the afternoon there until we see that. Oh, it starts snowing. It has to go back, and then if the snow's not too bad, then tomorrow my regular group of friends that play D&D together will hang out and we'll have cake tomorrow.
Okay.
So that's the plan for the weekend so far.
Okay.
So once again, thank you guys for joining me. It was a lot of fun, especially talking, Spider-Man. No Godzilla talk this week, but that's
lots of Spider-Man.
That's perfectly fine, but a lot of Spider-Man. And I am happy that you shared your childhood Spider-Man stuff because I'm always curious where people may start with Spider-Man, jump off with Spider-Man, or may not come back. So
you started right where I ended.
Exactly. So you needed to stop for me to come in and be part of it. And it was fun to tell some old Marvel stories, which I like telling those too. So thanks again, guys, and have a great weekend.
All right. Have a good time out there.
I'll end the stream.
See if we can get some
balloons before the end.
This is fireworks. Let's try balloon. Let's try confetti. Nope, fireworks.
It's so weird when it pops. Maybe you went through them all. All right. Thanks again, guys.
Have a good one out there.
Okay.